we had one of your country fellows here, a person from Gothenburg. He was here. Yeah.
Oh, tell me.
His name was Sebastian. He is a Romanian Swede, Pobrescu. He is from Gothenburg, and he runs a restaurant and karaoke bar.
Yeah. Nice.
Hi, Antti.
Hi, Antti.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Cool.
And okay,
So
I think it's a time for us to start. We should start
yes.
time. And I don't know, is it Michio?
Yes.
Yes. Hi,
Oh,
Michio.
hi.
Hi.
Hi, Michio.
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you.
Okay, maybe this is what we will do. Why don't we start with a quick introduction of each other? Then we will have a little bit discussion of how we want to organize ourselves, and then we will discuss the book. Let me start with myself. My name is Eugene Matusov, and I'm interested in dialogic pedagogy, in democratic education and authorial agency, and many, many, many other things. And I think probably that's, another thing. It's can be helpful for all of us. Whether or not we read a book, and I developed this coding. There is two possibilities. Either you're a good student, which you read the book, or you're becoming a good student, which you either didn't read the book at all, or you read part of that. By the way, if you read a part of that or didn't read the book, don't feel ashamed or whatever. You can be extremely helpful because you will ask a very good question, like what's the book about, or something like that. And usually it's terrific questions because they will allow us in a natural way to talk about, because we probably read this book very differently. And it will be very nice to discuss. That's a very good questions. Okay, so again, my name is Eugene Matusov, and I'm a good student because I've read the whole book. Okay, next one, let's make it Charles and then Tina and Antti and Michio and Anna. Okay, Charles.
Hello, I'm Charles Bisley, and I'm a teacher. I'm the associate principal of my school in Wellington, New Zealand, which is a state school. And I'm also a part-time, I don't know what you'd say. I'm a part-time pedagogue, and I'm very interested in empowering students. And I was very intrigued by Biesta for some time, and for a long time now I have some disagreements with him. So I was interested to come in. I've read another couple of books of his in the article, and so I have read, I'm not as good a student as Eugene, but I have read a lot of the book. Yeah, especially the bits that interested me. Other bits I found very abstract and rather, I won't talk about that right now. And so there we are. And I'm involved in all kinds of battles in our state education system to do things differently, because we've recently, for 9 years, we've had a very standardized testing regime, which we've had to battle against, and also we have all kinds of other problems. So these things that Biesta talked about are real to me. They seem quite theoretical to him, but they're very real to me.
Thank you. And Tina, you're next.
Yeah, hi. I'm from Sweden, and I'm a lecturer in Kristianstad University. Maybe you, Antti, know this town. Kristianstad. It's in the south in Sweden, and I have a passion for, it started with Eugene's book, actually, and texts, and now I'm a fan of, Anna as well, and Charles, I like your texts, and Antti, of course, logic pedagogy. But I came from the field of aesthetics and music, but I'm trying to escape that field. So I'm a lecturer in educational science, basically. And the whole thing about this Biesta book, shall I tell you how it started? No? Eugene says no.
Okay, can you wait? Can you tell us whether or not you're a good student or becoming a good student?
Yeah, because, but it has to do with what I was trying to say, because it all started with a review a German reviewer, Ewald Terhart, who wanted me to comment on his review on this book. So that's why I had to read the book. So I'm a good student the first time.
Actually, I want to add that actually Tina is responsible for bringing this book to us and suggesting that to discuss that. So
yeah,
her fault and credit, of course. Okay, let's move to Antti.
Okay.
Antti.
Yes, I just unmuted my microphone. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all here through distance. My name is Antti Rajala. I am working in the University of Helsinki as a postdoc researcher. I have similar interest as many of you. I'm interested in biologic pedagogy, agency also. And currently, I'm becoming more and more interested in kind of how learning and teaching are situated within wider societal and even political context, how to speak. And also from that, how as teachers and learners, how we also interact with responsibility. Not only agency, but also whether, like Peter Renshaw said, whether the agency is worthwhile. And I am not a super good student. I didn't read the whole book, but part of it. But I feel that I have read a lot of Biesta, and he all the time repeats himself. So I feel that I am okay in joining this. But I actually read part of the book, and I have a difficult relation with Biesta in a way because I like him. He's very provocative, and he has fresh ideas, and I agree to some extent, but also I feel I want to disagree with him. So it's an interesting situation. So I found this really worthwhile to have this reading group, although it's my holiday, so I'm really thinking this is worthwhile to join this. So thank you for organizing it.
Thank you. Okay, Michio, please, now it's your turn.
Hello. Hi, my name is Michio, and I'm teaching at the Chicago Public School. I teach K through 8, kindergarten through 8th graders Japanese language. And I am a graduate school student in a DePaul University. I am somewhat good student. I read most of it, and I did a really detailed reading on some part of the book, that part that I'm really interested in. And Biesta's idea is really, how can I say, intriguing for me, because it talks about something that we don't talk about in the public school, especially his idea of desire and putting desire into the perspective. That's something that I think I want my students to become good at it, but it's not part of the curriculum. It just, we don't talk about how can we make our students a better person by teaching them how to put their desire into the perspective. So that's where I am, and I'm so glad I'm part of the group. I was looking for the people who can discuss the ideas. So thank you for having this.
Thanks a lot, Michio. Again, remember that it's Tina's fault. Thanks, Tina, for that.
Okay.
No, thank you very much.
Yes, and Anna next, and then after that, Mark, and then Melissa. Okay.
Okay, hi, my name is Anna Marjanovic-Shane, and I'm an independent scholar here in Philadelphia, very near, a few blocks away from Eugene, but I also work a lot with Eugene on dialogic pedagogy, meaning-making, dialogic meaning-making, and my interests come also from early childhood education, studies of play, drama in education, and play in education. So play and creativity, but I'm moving really more and more to democratic education and democracy and dialogue, issues of that. Recently, I started working on a project with the Tina and Michael Gradowski from Norway about the Norwegian experiment, not Norwegian, Scandinavian, let's say, experiment in democratic schools in the 60s through 90s, so to speak. So, and organizing a special issue of Dialogic Pedagogy Journal on the issues of democracy and dialogicity. So about the Biesta, I am this time a good student. I read the whole book and some, and I have also, as Michio says, a lot of interest about exploring students' educational desires and teachers' also pedagogical desires, but and although Biesta uses a lot of terminology that's very attractive to me, I also have a lot of disagreements with him. So far, so good.
Thanks, Anna. Next is Mark.
Yes, hello. My name's Mark. I am actually worked with Eugene and Anna for many years, and I'm now in the process of seeking new forms of employment after being a English as a second language teacher for many years, literally pulling my hair out because I was doing exactly the stuff Biesta talks about we shouldn't do. You know, it's funny being in an environment where I'm just thinking about myself, because that's, I guess, we're supposed to think about ourselves, right? And I was thinking about the fact that I am, you know, interested in dialogic pedagogy, very interested in particularly in extending Bakhtín's notion of beingness event into the educational arena. And here I am sort of like teaching this crap, you know, onto students for all these years. And, but anyway, it was good because it got me invested, I think, for a lot in understanding teaching a lot more. Doing my PhD and then going into teaching full time was an interesting way to go about things. And so now I'm in the process of, yes, I did read this book. I don't know if I'm a better person for having read it, but I did read it. So what that means for me in terms of what Biesta would think about that, I don't know. Am I changed? Did I learn anything? You know, those are some questions I have regarding this book. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, and now Melissa, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Bradford, and I am a professor at DePaul University. And Michio, as a matter of fact, was my dialogue partner for my dissertation. And I teach in educational leadership at DePaul, but I also teach 2 classes on dialogue. I use mainly the thinking of Daisaku Ikeda, who is a Buddhist philosopher and school founder from Japan. And he talks a lot about dialogue. So I'm really excited about this book. I read the first 2 chapters, and then I read the summaries of the rest of the chapters. I'm thinking about how this might apply to democratic school setting, how these ideas of dialogue or these different conceptions of dialogue might apply. Something I appreciated about the book was the discussion about Levinas, because I've read just only a little bit of Levinas, and I appreciated being able to understand it in the way that Biesta explained it. And I'm also thinking about this reading in terms of the class that I taught last quarter that I found very challenging to teach, where my students were not very interested in taking responsibility for their experience in the class. So I'm excited to talk about this book. It's got a lot of interesting ideas, I think.
Okay, well, thank you. Maybe some other people join us, but in this case, they will just join us. Now, I'm proposing to do the following things. And actually, I have 2 options for us to consider that. Maybe you will bring more options for that. This is based on our previous experience with reading groups. By the way, there is somebody making noise, and I don't know who is that. Okay, good. I think it's gone now. Okay, so this is the one way to do that. One way is to have another circle, actually two circles. One circle to say what you like in the book, and then discuss that. And then another circle to say what you don't like in the book, and then discuss that in the free discussion. That's one possibility. Another possibility is to have one circle, one more circle, just one, when we say what we like and what we don't like, without possibility to a discussion. And after that, we will start discussing in ways. In this case, everybody has possibility to say, or you can also raise questions for us. In this case, everybody has possibility to say something, and then we will have discussion. And we also need to find who can be our facilitator, if we need that. Maybe we are such a great group that we don't need facilitator. So the first question: should we have one circle in which we'll say what we like in the book, what we don't like in the book, and the questions to each other or to the book? Or should we have two circles? One circle we will say what we like in the book, we'll discuss that, and then switch to what we don't like in the book and discuss that. What do you think? How do you think it's better?
For me, it would be better maybe two circles, because we will give all kind of like good issues and discuss about that, and then start with our critique.
Okay. Any other who disagree? Okay. Antti, like that? Like that? Mark, what about you? Do you like that? Okay. And Charles, do you like that? I don't see it. Okay. He's not. So Charles is not happy with that. Okay. Okay. Okay, you know what we can do? Since, like, Charles, who cares about you? Majority rules, right? Why don't we try that and see next time? Maybe we'll change if we feel that we don't like that, because both of them has pluses and minuses. But you know, life is like that. But yeah, it's a good question. Maybe we should next time try what Charles maybe like that, and see how it will work, and then we will make informed choice after that. Okay, in this case, let's start with another round in which we can say what we like in the book. Again,
I suggest that maybe Tina now tells us how this whole book, project came. Why did you even bring this book, and what you like about it?
Yeah, and yes, let's start with. Okay, who will facilitate our discussion?
You, Eugene. You, Eugene.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. So in this case, Tina, let's start with you. So just tell a little bit about us, how you came to this book, and what you like about that in the book.
Yeah, and I'm not supposed to tell critic now. So
no, not critic, only positive things.
Okay. Am I supposed to tell something about the content or not?
I think, you know what, let's wait until people will start asking about content.
Okay.
Because people who may be becoming good students, maybe they might actually say, I don't know what I like about the book, but I have questions like, what the hell book is about? Like,
that's a dialogue idea. Okay. Yeah, okay, then I must think. What I like, okay. I think I'm clear on what I like. What I like is some of his rhetorics that he's used to repeat in his works, all his works. And of course, it is anti-instrumental view on education. But in this book, he brings two. So I like the idea that he brings two views together on education. As also this reviewer says, the one is that is going beyond the instrumental view, the traditional view of the teacher who is focused on controlling the classroom management and preset learning outcomes. And also he's against this rhetorics about that the teacher has an impact factor. To be is something much more, and it's reductionist to view it in this technical way. I like that from Biesta. And I also like something about his approach, his more phenomenological approach, at least based on Arendt and Levinas. And I like that he's searching for a more provoking attitude to education and a more that he likes interruptions. But I think he's very, very confusing, and I have a lot of critics as well.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let me do a completely random things. So Michio, what you liked in the book? By the way, if you have questions, feel free to ask questions as well.
I'm a teacher. I have been teaching in Chicago for 15. This is my 16th year of teaching, and definition of good teacher. What is a good teacher, and what is a good student? Seems to be always revolve around academic achievement, and that's what we care about. We, as in my school or Chicago public school, it seems to be that's the only topic that we are concerned about. And right now, what definition of good teacher is that person who can make their kids grow in the test scores. You test them in the fall, test them again in the winter, and test them again in the spring. If the kids grow, their score gets better, then you're a good teacher and you're good students. And there's nobody talking about how happy kids are, the happiness of the students, or do they enjoy school, or are they becoming a good person who can get along with other people? Nobody talks about that. And when I was reading stuff and searching for different ideas, I came across with Biesta's idea that putting desire into perspective, and that's how you exist in a grown-up way in the world. That hit me very strongly, that yes, I want my students to become a better person, meaning get along with other people. And there's no place to talk about it in our school, or when I participate in a professional development, there's nobody is saying that's important. And I think that's, desiring what asking. I want my students to start asking what I want is it okay to I want? I mean, by talking to their classmates and parents and me, and so that we can come to the group consensus, some sort of. And that kind of practice is just non-existent. And that's why I like the Biesta's idea, that I want my students to practice and get better at expressing their desire and listening to other people's desire, and then figuring out what we should desire as a group. And that kind of practice is just not there in our school. And that's why I like the idea of Biesta's book. It's upside down. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Okay, let's jump to, I'm jumping because it's on my screen. Maybe you can see it completely different, but I'm jumping to Charles, to you.
One thing I liked about the book was his critique from a philosophical point of view of a number of things that we mightn't necessarily criticize these days. So first of all, his critique of the idea of learnification and what we might call child-centered education, or learning centered on the interests of the child, and all these things. I found his critique of that very interesting, and I thought he had a very interesting way of negotiating the whole problematical notion of power. So I was very interested in that. And I thought one thing that really interested me about the book is he made no reference to Bakhtin at all, even though he talked about addressivity, the addressivity of the teacher to the student. the teacher addresses the student from outside of who and where they are. I thought that was very interesting that he didn't relate that event to the idea of Bakhtiyar's idea of adversivity. And another thing I liked was his critique of the neoliberal idea of identity and of the self, that we have this idea that we are addressing a certain kind of self, and he changed what that was, that kind of self that we should be addressing. But I mean, in particular, amongst all these things, in particular, I liked, and there was, of course, Levinas and going away from signification and buildings. But the other thing I felt in particular was the idea of dissensus from Montpellier, and in particular the idea of the incommensurable, that there's always something, or Korshak, there's something unforeseen, always in the subject, the person we have before us, the students we have before us. There is the idea of the unforeseen, and the idea that we leave the students to discover this. I think, I'm very critical of this in democratic education. My idea is that is in this disparity and asymmetry of address between teachers and others and students, that the unforeseen is introduced into their horizon as well. So the event is also a horizon. That's a whole lot of things, I know. There you go.
You know what, Charles, I just muted you because I think there is noise coming from, kind of background noise. So when you're going to talk, just don't forget to unmute yourself, okay? I think it's from Charles because it stopped, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's.
I still hear it a little bit.
Yes,
Me too, yeah.
Let me do Tina. Yeah. Yeah, I think it could be Tina. Okay, let me unmute Charles just to see. Yeah, Charles is fine. Okay,
I know,
sorry,
I
Charles.
know I'm fine.
You're fine. You're fine. Yes. Okay. So let's jump to Melissa, to you.
So a lot of what has already been mentioned, I would agree with finding those ideas really interesting. Another one that I was looking at is on page 28, where Biesta talks about 3 domains: qualification, socialization, and subjectification. And I wasn't completely sure what he meant by qualification, except maybe that means the grasping of intellectual concepts. I'm not sure. Socialization, I think I understand what he means by that. And subjectification, the way in which students can become subjects in their own right and not just remain objects of the desires and directions of others. I would like to explore that further. I find that really interesting, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Okay, thank you. The next, Antti.
Okay, let me unmute myself. I think there are a number of things that I like in Biesta's work. Many of them were already mentioned, like overcoming the instrumentalism, and kind of I think he is actually a quite powerful force. Teachers are interested in his work, so I think he can in actuality defend kind of other than instrumental ways of education. On the other hand, I feel this kind of a little bit strange because in Finland, in our schools, we really do not have this kind of instrumental education, at least to the extent that it's in other countries with all these high stakes testing, although many people want to push it towards that way. I think Biesta is interesting also. I think other people mentioned it already, but I think whereas I am interested in agency as transformation of given and transcendence, similar to what Eugene and others and Engerström have raised, I think there are not so many people who are interested in that. I mean, not just reproducing what's already exists in the culture, but rather conceptualizing the unforeseen. And I think Biesta brings another very interesting voice into this end of year. And so I'm interested kind of his take on Rancière, on dissensus, and all these things that how we understand the postmodern situation going beyond Freire or Marxist conceptions. So that's very interesting in Biesta's work. And also, I think that I already mentioned it. I think Biesta is raising the issue that how do we conceptualize learners' responsibility, that it's not only about sense making and kind of learning for oneself, but also learning for others, and what does it mean. Well, I think he's quite good in pushing us to think what it means to be with others, to grow with others, to become a grown-up person in the world, so that we have can together find sustainable ways of being together. I think this is a key educational question, which is a bit instrumental in a sense. Probably Eugene might disagree with me about its importance, but I'm becoming much very interested in this kind of discussions. So that is interesting, and also I think that he is one of the very few people who really raises the question what education is for. Because if we start from learning, I think it's kind of, we have very implicit views about education, because we always have education ideas about, for example, teaching for agency, but agency for what? I think Biesta challenges us, kind of people interested in learning, to really think deeper about our own implicit ways of understanding what do we want to kind of push. Maybe this doesn't touch you, but I feel that my own ways of thinking about this are quite naive in the bottom. So I like this challenge. Yeah, I think there are many issues, but maybe these are enough for now.
Thanks a lot, Antti. Anna, please.
Okay, let me unmute. Yes, I was unmuting him. Okay, so what I like about Biesta's book is that he raises a lot of issues that are kind of central to at least some of my interests, but always comes out on the side that makes me think really why I agree or disagree with him. And I found that I almost on any issue disagreed or found it very not well developed, although it was very interesting to think about these issues and what I think or not. For instance, one of them I could say that to me it's a very undeveloped discussion of what's that subjectness that he's talking about, and the call from outside, he doesn't connect either to Bakhtin or to Buber or to many other philosophers, so it stays like a very mystified, almost at the end.
Anna, no critique, please. What you like?
Okay, so I like that he made me think about many issues that made me think about what I actually think and why I think about them. That's what I like.
Thank you. Okay, Mark, please.
Yeah, well, actually, I have to admit, I found this book absolutely fascinating. And I think one of the reasons I found it so fascinating is because, exactly because I'm coming at this reading as from a Bakhtinian perspective, trying to understand what is meant by othering an event from his perspective is fascinating. As I read it, I saw an attempt at bringing, I might be crazy in thinking this way, I saw it as an attempt of bringing the revelation into education. The idea that somehow the teacher is this other, which has a perspective on the other, which in a way is outside, I guess, but also is someone who has not extra knowledge, it's not that, but has this kind of willpower, is how I saw it, which invites the person in. So in a way, education is a form of encouraging perhaps the students' willpower to develop themselves, but it's it's fascinating because it has this kind of, I would say, I mean, I like the idea that it talks about the unforeseen. That's interesting. But the puzzlement for me is, as I was reading it, thinking about what's his project, what is he after, what's he trying to promote, what is behind it. It's missing in a little bit of specifics. So I'd be really interested to know what people think is the project behind Biesta's work. What is his motive? What is he trying to get at? Like I said, from a theological perspective, it was interesting. But theology is not education. And I also thought it was interesting, his notion of grown-upness, because I've criticized that quite a bit in the work I've done. This idea that that there is a higher value or some kind of that in other words, that a student going into a classroom would have like a vision of the world that is somehow becoming, and that the teacher is the perspective that is the higher kind of more becoming perspective that the student is trying to reach. I found that I've criticized that in my own work as being very dismissive of student contributions and could possibly create, an effort at, for example, dismissing the value of what students contribute in the classroom. He doesn't see it that way, and I find that fascinating. He sees, and he brings in Bingham, I recall, in authority. I was always puzzled by Bingham's definition of authority as and I'm trying to remember how he defines it now. Authority as a sense of I guess of guiding the student towards what they're becoming, as I recall. That's different than power, which just simply imposes on a person. So again, I also thought it interesting because it's a critique of Kant, it does bring in a lot of interesting problematics also for me in terms of what constructivism means. I found it very puzzling that he doesn't talk much about social constructivism. He talks about individual constructivism, and I don't feel that for me, the book raises a lot more questions and it opens up perspectives that I've never thought about. So in that sense, it's interesting. And again, as I'm sharing some also concerns about why he dresses adversivity the way he does. But again, I'm very interested to know what people think of this project. For me, that's interesting to talk about from a Sartrean perspective. What is he after? What's his goal? What's his thing?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, so I'm the last person, and then we will open up and we will we'll create this mess, and we will trying to figure out how to deal with this mess. Okay, so for me, I also, like many other people, I'm always interested in Biesta because I'm always learning new things, and he's extremely provocative for me. He's absolutely I have agonistic relations to him. He's my opponent, and I strongly disagree with him. I disagree with many of what you said. I feel he's very instrumental, but that's critique. But nevertheless, I'm very excited. So I'm very excited. Let me say one big thing that I'm very excited is his approach to uniqueness. So he talks about that people unique and not necessarily because they're different, which is common approach, which is I ascribe to that. And I really like critique of his, why is it approach to uniqueness through difference is not good. Because he's right, in my view, it implies God's eye or bird's eye view, and to see, oh, this is different from this different. And it's interesting. I think it's a very good critique. Also, he introduced new approach with reference to Levinas about that, with the idea that we unique because we irreplaceable for other people. So other people call us because we are because they cannot call somebody else, and they need exactly us. I like that, and I don't like it as well. And my critique is different things about that, but I like that. In part, what I like about that, it's his attempt to define uniqueness coming from you rather than it. It's meaning difference, and you meaning you. You like. I need you. By the way, through the desire as well, which is I like that. I have some problems with that as well because just quickly, and we will switch to later to critique. It's the problem is that you can apply that to the stone or to the thing because I might have unique relations with the stone, and I don't like that. So I'm more interested in human uniqueness rather than uniqueness per se. But I think he's moving in the right direction. It just needs to be somewhat corrected. Another thing I really like, and people talk about that, that he raising issue how much education not equal to learning. And I might disagree how he answered to this kind of things, but I think he's also right that learning and education is not the same, which is usually, traditionally, it's applied that as if it's the same. Another thing that I really like his critique, what I would call pattern recognition. Remember, he talks about, I don't know if you remember or you don't remember, he criticized some type of learning which is shown in vacuum cleaner, in the smart vacuum cleaner, which can learn, like Siri or I cannot say that word. Because it listens to me right there and will react to me, or Alexa, and many other things like smart things and self-driving cars is coming to us. All of the type of learning is not it's extremely dominant in schools, and he's correct that it's nothing to do with education. Another critique, what he called meaning, which is in my view nothing to do with meaning, which is signification. He's so not Bakhtinian, it's right, and he doesn't understand that dialogic understanding of meaning. It's monologic view of the meaning, and it's good critique of that signification, which is for me it's more Vygotskian mediation. What he talks about is reference, mediation, all of that stuff, which is in my view also nothing to do much with education, and I think it's good critique, except he should not call it meaning. It's not meaning what he's talking about, in my view, from Bakhtinian point of view. What else? I also like that his critique of Freire about this, that Marx about this false consciousness, true consciousness. I really like that his critique of bringing that. Also, his focus on kind of desire. I still don't understand, don't disagree with him how he deals with the desire, but I really like to focus in education on desire as another type of curriculum, and not curriculum of knowledge, but curriculum of desire, of students' desire. Again, I don't like how he handles that, but I like that he calls for that. Okay, maybe I don't remember some other things that also attracted my attention. We will talk about that. So now let's create this cacophony, dialogic cacophony and mess when many people will try to talk at the same time. We will jumping from one topic to another and so on and so forth. I will only try, if you really want to talk and you're a shy person and you're not very comfortable jumping and interrupting other people, I'll try to monitor, and if people like raise the hand or something like that, or sometimes non-verbally. And remember, I have a power, because I can mute people actually if or unmute them. So I'll try to I try to be benevolent dictator. So to use all of these things for the humanity, for the purpose of humanity, as much as I could. Okay, so who wants to jump?
See, I raised the hand. I want to just then ask a question, Mark's question. I really want to kind of start from that. Like, what's Biesta's project? Like, what do you think? Because I also had, especially at the end, very strong feeling that there is a lot of, when I say mysticism, kind of religiosity in the way how he explains this call from the other, interrupting the person, like, or even not learning, but adopting things, adopting concepts. And to me, that's mystifying, or let's say some kind of a just believe. So what's his project? What do you think?
In my view, I think Michio is picked up on that, and I think he's right. I agree with Michio. With you, it's about how making people good, which is a very godly project, although God actually, this is from theological point of view, refused to actually do that. It's interesting that God, if you think about, well, and I'm talking about mostly probably of a Judeo-Christian Muslim tradition, refused to make people good. It's kind of remain to the people in different versions of that. But a lot of people starting from, in my view, Biesta continuous enlightenment project of how to make people good, and education will use to be solved problems of the society, promoting social justice, liberation, and so on and so forth, that's why he very gravitate towards Freire and Rancière, who is in that, in my view, in that group. Okay, Antti, please. Antti.
Yes, but I a little bit disagree with that. I mean, especially based on what he says. I think he's criticizing Freire and other Enlightenment thinkers from being kind of pursuing some goals that exist. And rather, I think he has this postmodernist vision building on Foucault and Rancière of like going beyond and transcending what we have. I think he is I think he has a practical project of destroying learnification and the focus on learning and promoting educators. But about where we should going, I think to me, in my interpretation, it seems that it has to be all the time an ongoing project, an ongoing question of what is good. I think he directly criticizes Freire for having the kind of this already given conception of what's good, and that's the critique of the false consciousness for him, and he tries to build on Foucault and others to try to get this kind of and also Rancière to open up a horizon of something new to emerge which does not yet exist, and in this I think he is quite close to Bakhtin. But maybe you have different views.
I do. Okay, but it's Charles, please.
In a way, I think he wants to give us all, including young human beings, some responsibility for being human. And in that sense, he reminded me a wee bit of Bakhtin's better idea about the idea there is no alibi in being. And all through his writing, it seems that he's returning to certain concepts that may have been slightly buried as a way of moving the debate, of changing what Antti said, of critiquing those concepts themselves. And in particular, I think one thing that he's interested in is, I don't know if Eugene, is this what you talk about when you talk about the ontological or theological level of education, which is something like, he's saying what matters, we might think what matters is the whole, what we are part of, but he says also he has an axiological dimension to his thought, that is it a good thing that we're going to be part of? So we're not only responsible, all of us, for the whole, for each other, but not just each other, but all of the others, but also that we're responsible for what kind of thing we bring into being, what kind of thing that we make, something like that. So it seems to me quite interesting, all his discussions and other papers about Heidegger, for example, and so on. And he's very concerned, I think, underneath all this, a very political thing, that he doesn't want to return to fascism or something like that. That he's very concerned about the horizon, about ecology and every other thing.
And this is why I'm calling him, sorry to say, he's very Kantian and he's very enlightenment. He's very anti-Foucaultian because he wants to do, he's subjectivating students. Because if you look about his goal of the education, is making students adult, which is interestingly how he defined adult. First of all, it's already an interesting point. From that point of view, education can be finished. You become adult and stop. You don't need education anymore. That's another one thing. And which means that it's a final. Education is final. It's not unfinalizable, but it's final. Another thing is how he defined adult, which is in a way, I'm surprised that he don't using what name Piaget, because it's exactly Piagetian, which is accommodation and adaptation. Is it accommodation and what's the other one? Accommodation and
assimilation. It's like a balance, and he's talking really either destroy the world or destroy yourself, and you have to be in that middle place, like balance between. It's very Piagetian, yes.
Very Piagetian, and Piaget was a very good student of Kant. This is ideas Piaget very nicely tracked that from Kant. By the way, I disagree with many of you who said that he's non-instrumental. This is very instrumental. It's just his endpoints, curricular endpoints, it's not knowledge, it's desire. He wants students to desire to be adults. And this is very control of a desire. It's very enlightenment. Rousseau talked about that. And Rousseau was very clear, unlike Dewey. For Rousseau, it was very clear that the whole goal project of education is making students to desire what the teacher wants the student to desire. And that's exactly Biesta. It's just like what exactly kind of desire is. It's different from some other people. He's not postmodern whatsoever, in my view. He's very modernist type of the philosopher, masquerading as postmodern in many ways. But it's very clear that he's, in my view, masquerading because he has clear goal, what is moving to goodness. Yes, it's true. It's interesting, Charles, how you talk about responsibility as if you're not talking about, again, it's external view of responsibility. It's about being good. What if people decide not to be good? Or what is their good is not what you think is good? This is what interesting things for me starts. He's not Bakhtinian whatsoever, and that's why he's not using Bakhtin, because he's not. Even when he using the same term like aggressivity, it's not Bakhtinian aggressivity. It's very modernist aggressivity. And that's again, we're switching to critique, but it's fine, I guess. Tina. Yes, Tina.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, you brought up a lot of things I was eager to because actually the whole thing started, I forgot to tell you all that I was reading you and started to chat with Eugene and Anna. And I reacted on how he was emphasizing socializing in a way. And I can explain that now. And because in my view, I'm concerned about this book. This book is worse than his other, in my view, because he actually robs the students from a student agency. I have been think about it, because if you read it carefully under the surface, the implications are very bad for the students, I think, because like Eugene, I think how he defines subjects. You're only a full subject if you are grown up, as Eugene talked about, when you are adult. So you are, and what he says is the desire. No, it's not a free desire. He's against open freedom. He says the teacher should move the student into the position of desiring to be on the middle ground. And then you ask, what is, you have read it, but the middle ground, that is the place, the metaphorical space for being safely, you are safe from the extreme position of word destruction and self-destruction. So it's, as you say, it's like Piaget, or it's a sort of balancing logic. And I asked, like Mark also did, why? What's the project here? To me, it's a very conservative book. You're trying to legitimate the teacher authority, basically, I think.
And what's going along with Tina, did you see his particular, he's very philosophical and very abstract, but there's in one place he become very concrete, more or less concrete, not very concrete, more or less concrete when he describes his own teaching practice. And I forgot what the page's number, but it's, if you search on the word adept, and this is adept concept. I'm sure how violent, it's
sustainability.
Based on violence. Because he it doesn't allow students to understand new concepts, but adapt them and just live with these concepts, which is, in my view, it's very violent things. I mean, I'm nothing against if some students want to do that, but there are a lot of them, like, for example, I would never allow myself to adapt to something without me understanding that. And this is what I was little once. I was draft teachers crazy, like Biesta crazy, because I was fighting back. But it's, let me tell you, it's extremely violent approach, which is, and he resurrects huge conservatism, authoritarianism of the teacher. And he argues for that very strongly. And he, with the fighting against constructivism and many other things, he's really super conservative in a way. That's why he resurrects all these monologic kind of forms by saying, like Göttingen address by Lincoln, like, what's wrong? It's a lecture. Well, he's forgetting that many things that makes this a lecture dialogic. It's not, since he's not very dialogic philosopher, he's not seeing that for him, lecture is a lecture. And he doesn't see that in what relationship is embedded things. And then maybe, again, I agree with Tina, not only that he's conservative, but he's very violent educator. Okay, who wants to jump? Yeah, Antti, please.
Okay, I think it is very interesting, I think, kind of trying to go beyond what he says, but what he kind of means, because there are papers from him in which he kind of deconstructs the idea of given idea, for example, of social justice, and I think he speaks approvingly of Foucault. But I agree. This is my problem with Biesta all the time, because he centers all the time on the educator, and what remains kind of under conceptualized is the person who learns, who the student, and their activity. It is almost as if only those moments in which the teacher was there were the only moments that exist. So there is kind of this unknown, which is exactly what many of us and most notably Sheen Leib has been talking about, that there exists a lot of things that are not in the teacher's view, and I agree with some of the criticism, but I would also like to point you to his definition of the grown up. On page 8, he says that what distinguishes a grown-up way of existing from a non-grown-up way is that the grown-up way acknowledges of existing acknowledges the alterity and integrity of what and who is other, whereas in the non-grown-up way, this is not on the radar. So there is indeed some echo of Piaget, of like decentrating from being egoistic into kind of. But on the other hand, I'm thinking that isn't this something that we all, or many of us, share? That it is good if if people are somehow related to each other and dialogical. Isn't this just another way of saying that being a grown-up is to relate to the world dialogically? So I just leave it at that.
Okay, Mark.
I kind of think, Antti, that I found both good things and bad things in this concept of grown-upness. On one hand, the idea that you're kind of scaffolding children to be grown-ups seems horrible and completely wrong. But on the other hand, if you think about his concept of grown-upness and then put it with the concept of unforeseenness, and also his idea of what authority is, and just think about those things, I think those cluster ideas give you a different impression of what he wants. Even though he doesn't articulate, my real problem with him is he doesn't articulate in concrete terms what this looks like in the scene of dialogue between students and adults or between people of any ages. There's no idea of that whatsoever. And so I think my biggest issue with all of these things is the incommensurability. Eugene, you say this. You say it doesn't matter what kind of education we're talking about, dialogue is always there, whether the teacher wants it or not. Relationality is always there, whether the scene is set up for that or not, it is always there. And Biesta's idea that somehow or other the teacher has to introduce incommensurability into it is the idea that teacher has to introduce incommensurability into the scene is kind of wrong. It doesn't have to come from the teacher. It is already there. The horizon is already there. The dialogue is already there. It does not depend on the initiative of the teacher, but the teacher has a role in it. And that's a big difference I have with him, I think, practically.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Mark?
Yeah, I would love him to read Vivian Paley and just read what kindergartners are capable of discussing and dialoguing about, you know. I mean, you know, I was shocked really by the lack of attention to, it's as if he sees constructivism only from the point of view of Piaget. He doesn't expand beyond it. And exactly right. What, you know, mentioning Lave, you know, I mean, I thought of Lave the whole time I was reading this. You know, the notion of transformation of participation, learning is transformation of participation. As I was reading that, I was thinking, what if he thought of that, you know? And then I was thinking, why doesn't he think of that? And it seems to me like he doesn't think of that because he deep down does not value the perspectives or the ideas of those he considers to be lower, in a sense, on the realm of, that's my understanding of what it is to be fully human. And that's a deeply troubling idea. And, you know, so as I was reading it, I was thinking, so what's he answering to? Because, you know, I was kind of playing the role of the underground man here, trying to think, well, what's he thinking about, you know? And he seems to be thinking about, I think, he's probably concerned about things like global warming, you know, the use of, you know, so I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, so let's hypothetically think of a person that lives in, let's say, a small village who still drops the oil down the drain in the village that he lives in, and it's affecting the ecology, you know. I think deep down that's the image that I had of the learner that he thinks of. He thinks of a person who does a lot of mistakes, and the reason that they do mistakes is because they don't think about the consequences of those mistakes to another person. So deep down, the learner is incredibly egocentric, doesn't think about themselves, and doesn't have an understanding of what others would say, aggressivity in his view, in regard to that. And so what he creates is a learner who's deeply selfish. That's why he hates learner-centered pedagogy so much, because a learner to him is a person who is extremely egocentric, doesn't quite understand the perspective of other, and somehow he thinks that the role of the education, so in this sense it's very I think everyone's right who's making the comment about this. His view of education reminds me of those early views of education that come from this notion of democratic, you know, that education is about democratic citizenship. I think deep down he firmly believes that the educator's role is to democratize people and make them think of other people before they make actions and make decisions. But this is deeply troubling because my concern is that that's not the role of education to make people's decisions for them. The role of education is to help people to understand where they lie in, for example, from a Bakhtinian perspective, it's to help people understand that they're not innocent when they make an action or a decision, but it's not to make people make decisions, not to make them be grown up. That in my view is a very mistaken view of education, because it's trying to social engineer, not to educate. And I think deep down that's what he's trying to do.
Okay, Anna?
I agree with Mark to some point. I just want to add to that, because I think it's a very good idea to talk about desires and the role of the desire, both of the educator and of the students. That's actually a key idea. But the way how he deals with that is that he really is not interested in the value of the he's not interested in the students and their desires and when they come through. So he's more about like decree that you should be like this. He has that end point, and which precludes him, which in a way he criticizes Freire for social justice, but he has a project of his own. Maybe it's teleological, maybe it's environmental or whatever it is, but in every way, in his view, it's a deficit model, and that's why it's instrumental. It's a deficit model of the student, and he's this interest in the student itself. So that's one big problem. Another problem is that he's really not interested intellectually. When he talks about cognition or comprehension, for him that's construction of the student, but he's not interested in the dialogic way of so that's why I said that he raises issues that I would say, yes, talk about desires, and yes, talk about your ideas compared to other people's ideas, but then he's puts back into the whole picture the authority of the teacher without the interest in the really and without then open-endedness for the student.
Okay, Eugene, and then Charles, right? Charles, you wanted to talk after that. No, I thought you were raising your hand as well. Maybe I misunderstood your non-verbal communication. I just want to make 3 comments. One comment, it's actually rooted in work of Charles. And for those of you who don't know, Charles is actually working with middle school students, developing wonderful art projects. And I'm paraphrasing his communication with his students. Charles, correct me if I'm wrong later. But basically, one problem in the world his students see, and Charles kind of agree with that, is there is too many adults, too few children, unfortunately. And that's the problem in the world. From Biesta point of view, too many children, too few adults. But from students of the Charles and from Charles' point of view, and Charles, you will have time to correct me, but this is my reading about that. Too many adults, too few children, and that makes the world a really bad place to live. That's one thing. Another thing I want to comment about this, that if you notice, in my view, Biesta is really about Kantian project, educational Kantian project. And let me provide because he sounds like arguing against Kant. How come it is? Because Kant actually was, from education point of view, from his point of view, the idea is that it should be democracy of rational people. The world should consist of democracy of rational people, universally rational people, of course. And the whole thing should be without much authority. It should be like Habermas continues that kind of things, which is like if we're rational, we can convince each other in universal truth. And after some deliberate discussion, when we inform each other, we will think in the same way, which is the way of the truth. The problem for Kant is what about education? How to make people rational and universal, focus on universalities. And for that, Kantian solution was, you cannot use democracy for that. You really need to be authoritarian to raise students to become rational. And I think this is Biesta's version of the Biesta project. That's why I think it's very Kantian. So you cannot trust dialogue, actually. You cannot trust democracy. You cannot trust, because everything should be designed by the teacher. And the teacher should be, it's a good authoritarian thing. That's why he focused on how to promote teachers' authority. By the way, when I'm saying that, I'm not saying that teacher authority is a bad thing necessarily. But in my view, he's obsessed with that, which leads me to the third point. If you look at this teaching example of his concrete, more or less concrete teacher's example, there is no, it's only his voice is there. There's no voice of the students. He's not trying to report, okay, well, wow, the students did this and this contribution. And it's not only the reason that he forgot about like specific contributions. He's not interested in them. For him, it's the whole focus on his pre-Madonish teaching. And I call it prima donna because this is the center of the pedagogy, is the teacher. He's not, he's very open about that. And he's not covering that up, it's true. But that's what his is about. It's about teacher, 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 teacher. And students only, it's interesting, he talks about the teacher should not be an object of pedagogical action, but it is. Not at the level of knowledge, but at the level of the student desire. Because he really read about his adept, that the student's desire should be not to understand, but accept unconditionally whatever nonsense, sorry to say, Biesta as a teacher brings to them. Okay, I think Charles.
Yeah. So can I describe a situation to everybody, which will make things very concrete? So I make, one of the things I do is I make theatre projects with children, and often we take something from scratch, something that's important, and this gradually unfolds. And our school principal, he is a very Biesta style man. He has a belief in democratic values and children being taught these values, even though he thinks part of it should come from them. Jackie, can you shut the door? Part of it should come from them. He thinks that it still comes from us, that children cannot find these things for themselves or really discuss them. He thinks, you know, almost at the beginning, we need to put these on the wall and say what they are, and children will come to understand them as we go along. So just recently, he came to a dress rehearsal of a play that I was doing in a theatre. The children had made this play up with me. I can't describe that process to you, but it is a phenomenally interesting thing. And of course, if it was me making the play up, it would be very boring. The children really are the authors of this. And this was an idea. The idea of the play was that the world had been ruined by the adults, and the world had been totally ruined by the adults. And this was represented because no one could go to sleep anymore. So it was a kind of high, really theoretical thing that the children, I fed them some ideas and things they really liked, but it was set a little bit. There was a film recently called The Lobster. Did anyone see that, about a place where you saw the film The Lobster? Also Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain. So there was, you know, all these sort of big ideas in there, but the children were exploring. Anyway, he came to this rehearsal and he said to me afterwards, what was that? What was that? What did I see there? He said, that was very brave of you. I said, what was brave of me? He said, the children were talking all the time. They were only partly interested or not even at all interested in what you were saying. They were arguing with you. And sometimes I thought it was quite disrespectful, and so on and so on. He had no idea that somehow that I could give away my authority. And I don't think Biesta has this idea either, that I could give away my ordinary teacher authority, but still be very influential to mediate meaning in a way that he'd never seen before. And he was puzzled by it for weeks and weeks, even though he likes me a lot and thinks I can do, you know, good things and all the rest. He just wondered why I gave so much to the children. And I kind of think if you put Biesta in with this group of children, he would have no idea what was going on, because at our school, we have this big thing that when you see dialogue occurring between the children, then something really genuine and authentic is happening. Now, the other thing I wanted to say was the children always say before we put on these shows, that comes up every time, what are the adults going to think? And there's a very smart girl in the class called Kira. She's 12 years old. And she said, the trouble with adults is, she said, it's like with everything. It's like they want to be in a cinema all the time. They just want to kick back and be entertained. Yeah, but we've got serious ideas, but they don't know how hard thinking is. Now, the idea that we should be grown-ups in that sense, I mean, it's the adults who need to be more like the children rather than the other way around, because these children are seriously concerned about the future and what's happening. And they had these ideas they want, they had all these things in the play that were outrageous to the adults who blamed me. Like the main story was a lesbian love story, between these two characters. The children developed this idea. The parents were outraged, some of them. They would not believe me when I said the children came up with this idea. It's what they wanted in the play, not me. And so on. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Who is next? Or did we exhaust? Yes.
Could I just say that, hence, the incommensurability in that play wasn't something that I introduced into the scene. Not at all. The incommensurability came from the children's own becoming in the world. It wasn't me. I can't put in the unforeseen thing. The unforeseen comes from who the children are, the world they're in dialogue with, If it's my unforeseen, the children aren't going to be very interested in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe I can ask Anna, I think, since you introduced this notion of subjectiveness, Biesta's notion of subjectiveness. You raised some questions about that. Can you remind us what it was about?
Well, I had a lot of trouble with this concept that he is trying to develop because for me, I even read 2 times some of the things. So now I'm a super good student trying to understand what he meant by subjectiveness, because he's, I think, really vacillating between subject as subjectivity, as somebody's core of their personality, their value systems, and who they are, and really subject somebody under somebody else's rule, like a subject to the king. And it is because he's trying to say that you wake up the subjectiveness by outside call, and for him it's absolute. And so that means that the person is not an author of him or herself, because it has to be just responsibly answering the call from the outside, this dissensus that he calls, and I completely disagree that you can call that a dissensus. You're just not acknowledging any value of the students' authorship of themselves, of their ideas and who they are right now. And he talks in the name of waking up and calling somebody to transcend themselves. So he really destroys authorship and agency with this concept of subjectness that he developed. That's what I wanted to say.
A few things that reason. Charles, please. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to ask everybody, do you think that his idea of the subject and of subjectification is partly like Foucault? So, the idea of being subjugated, we have to be, there is in Foucault that sense of dialectic between, as a subject, you are creating yourself. When you learn, you're creating yourself in relation to everything, to others, to the materials and everything else, but you're also subjected. And I think Foucault tries to steer through that power dynamic of the thing that comes from you. You create yourself, but always in relation to something from outside, which is influencing, sometimes dominating you, but not always dominating you, Anna, sometimes influencing you creatively.
Yeah, but what he does, he somehow loses the notion of relation. That's a quality of the relationship. Because either you're subjected to somebody else and somebody else is called, but then it's not in relation to that whoever is calling you, who for you is a face in your face somehow. it's a I want to bring another person into I talked to Eugene about it. There is a dialogic philosopher, Nikulin, who talks about the personal other, like which is also something that I have a lot of questions about, really not critical, but just to understand what that is. But at least in that personal other, he's trying to develop a person's relationship to themselves in connection to somebody else. And he's trying to keep the dialogic relationship in that. And Biesta, who is not dialogic, completely decouples what he calls aggressivity or calling somebody else from outside from any kind of personal relationship between these people who are then in aggressive relationship. And that also he decouples of any kind of then knowledge or construction, as he calls it, or discussing a topic, or everything falls apart from my point of view when he cannot find any connection between how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you examine as a person, as a subject, and how the other influences that you in the relationship, not just kind of like push on you that you have to transcend yourself and just know something because you adopt it. And I think that the biggest problem is that he doesn't have dialogue in the center. He's talking about everything that requires dialogue, and he doesn't have it.
Let me jump on that for several things. And I'm trying to find something, but I couldn't find it. So I could be wrong about some technical things. In terms of the charts, my understanding of the Foucault, and maybe I'm wrong about that his notion of subject come from it's very political notion. It's not philosophical notion. It's political notion coming from the subjugating to the king, like everybody else by king as subjects. I've read recently a very interesting book that's called After Subject. And it's an edited book, a volume about asking many philosophers the same, what will be after subject? And one, and I forgot the name, and I tried to find the name of that person. If you want, I can find the book and the name of this person. He make such a clear point, a very exciting point for me. He said, after subject is citizen. After subject comes citizen, who is not, like we know historically, when the kingdoms and reigns collapsed, the new relationship among people emerged, not between sovereign and subject, but among citizens. Actually, it was preceding that, and even in Greek Republic or Roman Republic, there were citizens. And citizens is a very different concept than subject. And this is what's interesting in Foucaultian kind of context. Think about that. In other things that I was just recently talking about Nikulin, which is a very relevant thing. Nikulin discussed consensus and then dissensus and then heterosensus, and he came with allosensus. And I just was reading, I was asked to review an article who reviewed a book on Nikulin, and I don't know who is the author of that article, but it's a very interesting article. And that person talks about that notion of heterosensus comes from Levinas. So my feeling is that Biesta is confusing dissensus with heterosensus. And actually, Nikulin criticized that heterosensus for many things. What Anna, you talking about that it's like just the positions of the other, but there is no dialogic relationship with that. That's why he came to the notion allosensus. And allo in I think understand in Greeks means or maybe Latin. I think it's maybe Greek, Latin means other. And so this is where I thought it's very fascinating things. I'm not sure I fully understand neither heterosensus But I think, or I agree with you that I think Biesta redefined Rancière notion of dissensus, which is mostly found on the disagreement. And Biesta trying to move away from Rancière's definition. And in my view, from what I've heard, he's actually returning back to Levinas. And Levinas used the term heterosensus. If I'm correct, this is I need to check. And if you give me, maybe if other people talk, and I will really check whether or not it's true that it's Levinas. The heterosensus is coming from Levinas. And where I can find it in Nikulin, because Nikulin was talking about that. And I will just want to open the text. Nikulin said,
can I just, I think that's why Biesta is so, I almost felt viscerally against democracy, because for him, either there is consensus that everybody would agree, or everything is relative. Because he doesn't see that dialogic connection or dialogic touch, where you bring different ideas to play upon each other. It's not just relative, like, oh, I think this, you think this, and everything goes. And he doesn't have that connection, that's dialogic connection between ideas, where you take seriously many different ideas. You don't have to agree with all of them. I think that's what heterosensus is. But they exist for you, not as relatively all are okay, but for you to then start a dialogic, critical dialogue about what are the implications or what's good, what's bad about them, and bring them into contact. Yeah.
Could I ask, Antti, can I ask you a question about what you said about, maybe you could comment on, because you've read some other books of his. So he wrote a book with Bingham on Rancière, didn't he? And it's interesting I just want to relate that to what Anna said. So Anna said about dialogue. It seems that he doesn't really understand about children, in my opinion, when I read that book he wrote about Rancière with Bingham. And the thing is, he's got this idea, on one hand, this universal rationality, this Kantian rationality, which Eugene was accusing him of having. But on the other hand, he has this view of children, this respect for children and their strange ways of thinking. I think at one point he describes their kind of, their plan, the way their thoughts meander, and kind of, there's an aporia between them. There's no way of bringing them together, it seems to me. On one hand, you have this world, of universal thinking and values, and on the other hand, you have children with their strange divagations and meanderings, and you can't bring them together because he doesn't really experience or know who children are. I don't know.
I found it. Is it my turn or was? Okay, yes. So I found curious how you interpret the subject or subjectification in Biesta's work, because I have a different interpretation. For me, in my interpretation for Biesta, subjectification is kind of the opposite of socialization. And he says, for example, in the book, in the page 28, that I prefer to refer to subjectification, which is about the ways in which students can be or become subjects in their own right, and not just remain objects of the desires and directions of others. So from my earlier reading of Biesta and now reading of this book, I got the understanding that subjectification for him is very similar to what, for example, Eugene is referring as agency, in a way going beyond what is there and being able to create what you are. For example, he in other paper, he has made this analysis of democratic education, and in this country, I don't remember where it was, but in this country, he said that it seems that the democratic education only emphasizing qualification, that is giving the students tools for being a democratic citizen, and socialization, becoming like a given citizen, like to behave in given ways. And he was criticizing this model of citizenship education for having this missing component of subjectification, precisely that the students could become citizens in their own terms. That I'm not sure if I'm seeing your argument or if I'm misinterpreting what you say.
No,
but,
no.
But,
Antti, it's. I'm sorry. Probably it's my fault. We were not very clear. I was replying to Charles, who brought Foucault. I absolutely agree with you that Biesta's notion of subject is not Foucaultian notion of the subject. He used it very different way. And sorry for that confusion, because when I was talking about king and citizen, I didn't mean about Biesta at all. I'm talking about Foucault. Just digression. Sorry. It was related to Foucault, nothing to do with Biesta. To reply to you, in my view, on the surface, he sounds similar, but this is not. Like, for example, let me see where we disgraced, like we are separate. Like he talks about, it's kind of neither this world, not another world. In other words, he was saying, it's, remember he talks about, I forgot the exact words he was using, but he's saying it's kind of, it's not good enough to be realist. He used another word, but another idealist, which is that's the word he was using. In my view, it's not his business as a teacher to think in these categories, because he's normative, how people should be. And in my view, that's not the teacher's role to say, oh, as a student, you should be kind of dialectical between realist and idealist. It's not my business as a teacher to impose that on. In this case, he is subjectivizing them, students, like in Foucaultian terms. Mm-hmm. He is not using terms subject as Foucault, but he's doing exactly what Foucault criticized our modernist civilization, coming from Enlightenment. This is where critique of Foucault is correct. And we're using it in our subject, not how Biesta used the subject, but how Foucault used the subject. Because he constantly normalized how the students must be. And he talks about that. And for me, this is instrumentality, because he is actually sends a final endpoint, which is not uncritical completely. Like everything that about, like it's one to be adult. In other place, by the way, this thanks for Antti for touching about that, because I forgot about that place, where he talks about that you should be neither realist not idealist. Again, his word is not realist by something else, but I forgot what exactly word. But it's kind of be almost like dialectical relay or moving back and forward between these two. Well, again, who said that? First of all, who said that's ideal? It's very problematic, and on many levels, it's just epistemologically problematic. But pedagogically, why that we should be imposing on the students how they should think? Because it's about how the students should think. Because they should think like Biesta, and he doesn't like that the students should think like Freire, and he noticed that. But he replaced Freirian impositions, but his own imposition of goodness, without noticing much about that. To some degree, in contradiction to some of his critique of Freire. He's guilty of the same thing, what he charges Freire. Correct?
Yeah, if I just make real quickly, what I find interesting is how I'm rereading the chapter on Levinas. And I find it interesting that he seems to think that without the other being the teacher, that we're directionless. Yeah. That what we'll do, we're kind of, I guess we're hedonistic. That was the impression I got. That we don't, without that authority, we would, in a sense, turn inward on ourselves. Our civilization would be destroyed, and we would actually self-destruct. I don't know if that means that we would become addicted to substances. I'm not exactly sure what the thing is that we would do, because it wasn't clear to me. But the whole point is that it just seems like we, as he seems to think that fundamentally it's an ontological thing for him. And I mean ontological in the sense, not in the sense of existential vision of ontology, but I mean it in the sense of like a fundamental aspect of being. I think he sees that we are fundamentally somehow supposed to be in connection with other, but he's so uncritical about the educational system that I don't think he firmly understands what the consequences of that is. The consequences of what he's uttering is a very authoritarian vision of education. But I'm not so sure that he, one, cares about that, or two, is firmly... part of me sometimes feels that he is not taking seriously what he's proposing. And it certainly is the case, as Charles pointed out, that he doesn't have any specifics. So I get very suspicious when I don't see, and as Eugene pointed out earlier, the education that he described of the values education of his students, I didn't even understand what he was asking his students to do. So, you know, nor did I understand why they would want to do it. So, you know, there was sort of this, there's a lot there, but I think fundamentally, deep down, and here he writes, for Levinas, this encounter with the other is fundamentally ethical. So that is an encounter where there's something at stake, and where I, that is my subjectness, my existing as subject, am and at stake. I think fundamentally he sees this vision of the person as of the other, and he describes the face, you know, the face speaks to me, the face addresses me, the face summons me, and announces thereby the ethical dimensions of visitation. You know, this is very theological. But I don't see him really essentializing that pedagogically or understanding, as I pointed out earlier, that the consequences of that for teaching learning environment. I just don't think he's really firmly, it doesn't seem to me like he's taking it seriously.
Antti, and then Tina.
Maybe I can give Tina first because I was just speaking.
Thank you, Antti. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think this call from the outside, the problem is that it's unilateral. It's not from the student's perspective. It's only from a teacher's authority's perspective. And I would like to comment, when speaking about ontology, I think perhaps my biggest problem in this book is how he approached the concept of sense making. And I think we have talked a little bit about it, but did you also react? I can't understand how you can argue actively for going against sense making, because he does explicitly, repeatedly says that neither learning nor teaching about sense making. And I think, Mark, also to respond to you, I think what he wants seems to be this unconditional acceptance of other's voice, the authority, but it's the teacher voice. And so, I mean, I think he has a simple message somehow, and skip sense making, just relax, just adapt to the teacher's voice. I don't know if I'm too rude to him now.
Can I just jump in just one thing? Biesta reminds me Star Wars about like with mysticism, feel, don't think. And which actually, and it's a voice of the guru who telling like that, by the way. You should completely submit to the guru. That's why, again, for calling notion of subject, not Biesta, is very, very good. Okay, Antti and then Anna.
Yes, in disagreeing in this discussion, I also kind of agree with points that you raise and criticism of Biesta, although I have some reservation if it's really a straw man of Biesta. But on the other hand, I think main issue for me also is like for Tina is that that he seems to have a very strawman view of other concepts like sense making or learning. He doesn't define learning, I think, or theorize. He seems to attack learning as just acquiring predefined qualifications and then showing them in standardized tests. And we all agree that that's not the right vision. But so it's hard to engage with his argument because we understand probably learning or sense making in a very, very different way. But on the other hand, I like his idea that engagement with others and connecting with others is more than just sense making. I think it involves sense making, but I think he draws our attention. It's like connecting with others, being also thinking beyond like Western ideas and going to Eastern ideas of just like being connected and just having these enlightenment ideas of individualists that we are just start from this connection. Also, I know that Vygotsky said that we are from start already part of the bigger whole. So I think these philosophers like Levinas draw our attention that we are somehow connected. I don't like authoritarian idea that we should just like submit, without any question. I'm not sure if he's making this kind of argument, but I would disagree with this argument, at least.
Can I just jump on the Antti? I was specifically focusing how he defined learning, and I pick up 3 definitions of learning in him. Although it's very implicit, so I don't know whether or not he would agree with me or not. One definition is what you're talking about. It's like, which is schoolish definition, like learning is, this is what Michio was talking about, testing on the test, and you should improve. By the way, what's Michio is very interesting in the practice of school. The testing about different things, like at the beginning of a school year, it will be test about one thing, middle about another thing, and the end it will be completely different. Like even knowledge, epistemologically, it's about different tests. But you need to grow on this test as if it's about the same thing. But anyway, besides that, so this is one definition of Biesta of learning, and he criticized of that. Second one is he talks about vacuum cleaner, smart vacuum cleaner, which is not like that whatsoever. It's very emergent because it's a pattern recognition. It's like, all this Siri and Google and Alexa. No, it's not. It didn't hear me. It's it's constantly learning, and it's learning new things, and it's not with the end point. It's actually adjusting to us. It's a self-organizing system of this, and this is completely different type of learning. Pattern recognition and pattern production is a very different type of learning than what is school thinks as learning is. And the third one is signification, which he thinks it's meaning making. And I completely disagree that it's meaning making, but that's a third type of learning how he talks about that. And all of this for him, it's also related to the idea of learning related to the knowledge for him. It's about learning some kind of to the knowledge related kind of things. Although, if you think about a vacuum cleaner, it's nothing to do with the knowledge. Actually, it's not built on the knowledge. It's with the pattern recognition is completely different idea than knowledge. But this is 3 things that I pick up from Biesta. Okay, Anna next. It's just like, sorry, I just have to jump on that. And then Michio.
I give my voice to Michio because he's going to reply to you.
Okay. Michio, can you, and I can do it for you. Yeah.
Hi, okay. I'm not familiar with this system.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing a lot about power and authority and how teachers exist with students with this conversation. And one of the fascinating point that Biesta is making, in my opinion, that Biesta is making is how Biesta is describing teacher power and authority. If it's okay, can I read some stuff from his book? It's page 19, starting from page 19, very bottom. Last 3 lines to the next page. The ambition of educational interruptions is to turn students toward the question of whether what they desire is what they should be desiring. And much of the work of the educator is, page 20, about creating time, space, and forms so that students can encounter their desires, examine their desires, select and transform them. Whereas the question of the desired and the desirable is introduced by the teacher as a powerful interruption, the ambition is that this question becomes a living question in the life of the student. At stake here is the question as to what should have authority in our lives. And the question of authority is precisely about coming into dialogue with what and who is other. It is about letting something or someone have power in our lives. It is about authorizing what and who is other. It is to let it speak. So to say, to make it into an author. Keep going. What we hope is, as a teacher whose teaching is aimed at the subjectness of our student, is that at some point, the students will turn back to us and acknowledge that what in the first instance appeared as an unwanted interruption, as an act of power, did actually contribute to their grown-up existence in and with the world, the grown-up subjectness. When such turning happens, and only when it happens, we can say that power, which is always monological and one-directional, has transformed into authority, which is always dialogical and relational. So I find this part really intriguing and helpful. Me as a teacher, I always struggle what is my role in my classroom. I teach kindergarten through 8th grade. I am not a kid. I'm a teacher. I'm an adult in the classroom. And I am also employed by Board of Education, Chicago. And it comes with a job description that I have to do certain things. And I do have power given by Board of Education. And I'm not student. And I do have some obligation to do certain things. And how do I exercise it? When to exercise it? And how do I relate? Knowing that I am not a student, I'm not equal to them. It just, when I walked into the classroom, I'm a teacher, I'm not a student. And the question is, how am I going to relate with my students? And how am I supposed to have a dialogue that Bakhtin is promoting? And because it's just not, how can I say? I do recognize that I do have more power than my students. And with that said, what should I do? What does it mean to I have power? And the Biesta's this part tells me that I have a power, or I'm an authority only because my students let me have a power. Without my students, I don't have any. That it's a recognition that they let me interrupt. And when they realize that, when they're okay with it, then I get to do that, teacher thing. So without my students acknowledging that I have power and authority, then I'm not. So this part really helped me to give me some direction, guidance to my long time question of who I am. What does it mean to be a teacher in the classroom with my students? Yeah.
Anna and then Charles, sorry.
Okay. Yes, this is a very interesting passage, and when you, especially when he says it's about letting something of or someone have power in our lives, it's about authorizing what and who is other. It is to let it speak, so to say, to make it into an author. So. And so my question here around the same thing is who is making who in the author? So I hear that you, Michio, said, heard Biesta's talk about the students authorizing the teacher to be the really a welcome power in their lives and making the teacher into the author. But my problem is not about teacher having the same status and no power with the students, especially, I mean, in every class, that doesn't matter what age. But the question is about the quality of that power. Is it the power of the somebody who can who is not interested in who you are, although he's trying to do that and erase the time, like not producing some end results. But on the other hand, with so many other things that he does have that end point in what is a good desire and what is a bad desire. So he somehow masks his power over knowledge to have a power over students' desires. And yeah, so in a way, it is very Rousseauian to make the student want what the teacher actually wants. And then the student will do the work in their own way. But what right now, after that, after this, what you read, he also says, what we hope as a teacher whose teaching is aimed at the subjectness of our student is that at some point the student will turn back to us and acknowledge that what in the first instance appeared as an unwanted interruption is finally they understand when they grow up that that was really, really good for them to swallow that interruption as a, so to me that's the, not that we should say, well, he just wants to, Biesta just wants to acknowledge power, but he wants to mask it in some way for the student and for himself through this examination of the desires, which are not open. That's not open-ended, because he very clearly defines what does it mean to be an adult. And then he puts the responsibility on the student to achieve that. And so he would not say that testing can probably measure that as the testing today measures knowledge, but he would still judge the student as let's say, agreeing what's a good desire or not good desire, if he would even go to a critical dialogue with the students, which he doesn't in the one example that he gives there. And that, for me, is the problem. I agree with you that you always have power as a teacher. That's the position is asymmetrical, and his attempt to critique Freire to make a teacher like a same on the same level as the students, like what he calls side from the side something. I don't remember. Sage. And, sage on the stage and somebody on the side, or even on the back. Yeah, okay. That's very interesting, because he does not actually stop being sage on the stage.
Mm-hmm. Charles?
Just I wanted to say something that what I agreed with Antti, that when I was reading him, Biesta, I was very careful that I didn't just take one of his arguments as a straw man for some of the things that I dislike or feel antagonistic towards. And just responding very quickly to the idea of the subject is that I think he has in mind when he talks about the subject, what he doesn't like is the idea of sort of the personal, the sort of personalized learning that you see around the world now, where children are on devices all the time doing their own little projects, and they have very little kind of collaboration with other. They learn to be cooperative. They have to cooperate with each other and all the rest, but they're really following their own subjectivity. and that kind of ego-driven thing. So I think he's got a very strong argument against that kind of subjectivity, which you can see. I mean, in the 70s and 80s in New Zealand, we had very strong democratic alternative school tradition. I was the principal of a school, a democratic school, and you were never ever allowed to teach the students anything that they didn't come up with or they didn't think about first, and so on. And this was a very strange kind of asymmetry as well. And it wasn't at all successful, but I'll talk to you about that later some other time. But I wanted to respond to what Michio said about the position of the teacher in the classroom, because I really responded to that. And as a teacher, when you're with younger children especially, well, all children, you do feel the asymmetry, you do feel the power that you have over the students and as representing the institution and so on. But I think, on the other hand, if we think about Biesta and what he's saying, maybe he doesn't go this far, but if you become the other to the students, they also need to become the other to you. Only in that case, I don't think he says that, you know? So I think that's really what has to happen. And I think the other thing is too, that's very important from what Michio was saying, is that there are all kinds of different geographies or terrains or territories in the power dynamics of a classroom. And some in it, you have to be the person who gives the test. I have to give the test, otherwise I'll lose my job. On the other hand, there are occasions when I'm doing the play rehearsal when it's the opposite. So there are all kinds of asymmetries of power. There's not just one scene or one theatre. In a classroom, there are all these different power relationships playing out. They're diverse, more and more diverse as the system, as what you do improves. So the idea of this kind of monolithic institution where the teacher is the authority, I don't think Biesta really wants that. I mean, I think that's where he's coming from, but he's very interested in creating a new space, even though he doesn't know how to at all. He's introducing the idea of a new space, and I think his ideas and the way he puts his ideas and his stylistics rather militate against what he really wants to say. I would argue that.
Oh, okay. And Antti next, Eugene, and then Mark.
Okay, I think this is a really interesting dialogue we're having here. Only I like the passage that Michio just read, and I agree with Eugene that it sounds very Vygotskian in the old style, in the kind of that there is a creative process of internationalization. Yes, so that it becomes internal only if the students does the work of transforming or appropriating it. And this seems a bit old-fashioned. I mean, for people like Tina mentioned that we who have been writing about agency, I think there have been like from the past couple of decades papers visiting the sociocultural approach, saying that it's kind of focusing too much on internationalization and too little on externalization in a way, or students' contribution. So it seems to be a genuine limitation in Biesta. I'm just thinking about a very concrete example, which I've been told of having been interacted with some NGOs, for example, those who promote LGBT rights. That it is often that in some schools, especially in rural areas, the teachers are very homophobic. And it is actually the students in the middle grades who challenge the teachers' homophobia. So I think this aspect is completely missing from Biesta's. We assume just a very good person as a teacher, but the teacher might be like much less progressive in the good ideas than the students. So it is very kind of bilateral in the sense that there are only that one teacher and one student. Whereas I think the real situation is much more complex. We might even have NGOs that come into schools that I'm promoting actually that. So there are very different ideas there, and we should have like this scrutinizing of ideas and exploration like Biesta says. But I think the initiative should also be possible to come from the students or even from outside. And it might lead into a very different conclusion that the teacher wanted. So I think what Biesta does good is conceptualize one very important part of education. I think it is very, on my view, it's very important that schools confront students, for example, about the sustainability of the environment. We are in a crisis. I think schools I am instrumental and probably disagreeing with Eugene in this. I think schools are almost the only place where we can actually challenge the sustainability of our culture. But it should not be done in an unidirectional way, but like more as a dialogic provocation, like Eugene says. And I think Biesta is talking about this, and it's very important part of education, but it's just one part and not the totality, as I seem to interpret that Biesta is saying.
Thank you. I want just to reply a little bit to Michio about, I really like how you brought, for me, your interesting contribution is very ontological. This is coming from the teachers' almost cry for this big concern that you have, like what's your role as a teacher? And maybe I was thinking about constantly as a teacher about issue of teacher being professional. Currently, almost in all countries, maybe that exception, maybe Japan is exception, but I'm not sure about that. The teacher is not seen as a professional, but as a technician of the societal will. Society tells teacher what to do, and the teacher should do. By the way, how it's manifest. It's very rarely when, like say, United States, the court calls teachers as experts. To testify as experts, give expert opinions. They can call lawyers, they can call doctors, scientists, whoever, but not teachers. And for me, that's indicator that teachers are not treated as professionals. So if we start with that, we should dismiss certain demands on the teachers that society does because it's non-professional demands. It's something contradicts our profession, and we need to push back of that. For example, and for me, professional, it means authorial judgment. It means the judgment, the doctor says, this is my professional judgment. It doesn't necessarily mean that all other doctors would agree with that, but it's coming for the profession, and this is, judgment is recognized as important and respectful by the society. So, coming from that, in my view, the teacher starts not because somebody tells you, Michio or Eugene or Charles, you're the teacher, and sends you there and sends the salary and gives you what to do. That's not a teacher in my view, either yet or at all. The teacher starts from the relationship with the students. And if you think about, and this is what you are going with that, Michio, how I hear you. But if you start thinking about like, what's the relationship of the student that generate relationship of the teacher. In my view, it starts with the asking for help, asking question, asking for help. Without that, there is no teacher, in my view. On another hand, it's true that your teacher does, and this is what I agree with Charles, it's true, the teacher does not need to wait until student ask for help. There is a lot of things, proto-teaching what can be done, when actually it's provoking students asking questions. But in my view, dialogic meaning making, not what Biesta talking about that, not about signification, but about what Bakhtin's talk about, meaning making, starts with the serious question. But that question, it's not teacher's question, it's a student question. And on the other hand, the work of the teacher, a lot of proto-teaching happens in helping create this environment, rich environment, under which these questions can happen, can emerge. And sometimes it doesn't need to be the students full of the questions themselves and so on and so forth. And sometimes they have asked questions, but not the teacher. And in this case, teacher is not realized there for that particular student. The students can be autodidact. And in my view, that's also important and should be recognized that education is not about teaching. I disagree with Biesta about that. It's about a student. Also, what's the purpose of education is very important. And Antti was talking about that. In my view, the purpose should be defined in a way to negate its purpose itself. In a way, it's up to the students to decide what the purpose of education is. And I like the candidate for that type of definition that negates itself. It's something what Socrates provided for us. It's when he said that unexamined life is not worth living. And to say that a purpose of education is examination of life. It's not about saving planet, as Antti was talking about that. It's about examination of life, whatever it leads to. By the way, which means examination of education, it means examination of that statement itself, on which students might disagree in disassemble, and which means an examination, it means bringing alternatives. So alternative definition of educations are welcome under that definition of education. And that's what I just want to bring that, which is nothing to do with Biesta, in opposition to the Biesta, and with opposition to many others. So, and this is how I see a purpose of education, as a critical examination of life, which it means that alternative idea of education are welcome, because examination of life, including examination education itself. Okay, next is Mark.
Yeah,
Mark.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. I kind of connection to what I wanted to say, because I'm. It's interesting how educational practice can function around the ideas that he has, and specifically, I was struck by this connection he constantly makes that. I guess now it's really helping me to think about Piaget, because before that, I mean, I made the connection while I was reading it, but it's just so Piagetian that I'm sort of like struck by, in a way, it sort of makes me want to look back at, because I know Piaget did some educational writing, and it would be interesting to compare, you know, this idea of uniqueness versus sameness, and the fact that the teacher provides the uniqueness, that it almost seems like the child without the teacher is just going to be, and a couple, and I think the teachers here would really question this, because you guys are talking about exactly what Eugene was saying. You're talking about the relationship between yourself and the students, and the fact that you see the students as having mixed motivations and interests and so forth. But he sees the student almost like an amorphous blob, like they're same, that they're stuck in a cultural determinism, I guess, where they're not, I described them earlier as hedonistic. I don't know if he would agree with that. That's probably too strong, but definitely they're the same. They think the same way. They think like, so the idea, I guess, in some ways, it's almost like a very sort of left-wing view of the media. You know, this idea that, you know, all these people are out there constantly believing in, you know, well, I believe in, like, let's say, you know, what I hear in the news, and my mother and father believe the same thing, and I don't ever have that question. I think the same way as everybody else. I don't have this opportunity to be othered. And for him, the educator, as I understand it, is the person who others the student, who makes them unique. This is what he's saying. And it's very problematic for me, because the whole idea, how do you, first of all, I guess the biggest thing, there's lots of things that's problematic there, but the biggest thing for me is imagining myself as a teacher. And this is what made me think of this, because it's what Charles and Michio said that made me think of this, that if I'm an educator and I talk with someone, as a student, as a person, and I see them as all the same, I'm not going to be able to educate them. I mean, this is what constructivism has talked about for years, that I need to connect with people on a level of their ontology. If I see them as all the same, how on earth am I going to teach them? I find this very problematic, because he opens this up and he sort of sees this, but it's maybe I'm reading too much into it, and maybe I'm could be accused of taking a part of his work and sort of overextending it. But I really do feel like he really doesn't trust the student to understand, and to their understandings of the world, and deep down fundamentally questions the whole idea that the student will have a question that could lead anywhere. I think he seems to think that the only question that's worthwhile is the question coming from the other, the question coming from the teacher, because that question coming from the teacher is somehow unique to what I guess the idea that I see is the students are all stuck on Facebook, they're all Instagramming, and they're not thinking. And it reminds me a little bit of the criticisms that were raised against the after-school program that Eugene and I were involved in the early 2000s, where people came into the room and they said, "Well, what are the kids doing? They're just mindlessly pressing buttons. They're not doing anything significant. You know, you're not giving them anything. You know, that's making them different. Otherwise, they're basically just the same kids. You're not changing them in any way." And you know, so this to me, this tension between uniqueness and sameness in his work is very interesting and problematic.
Can I jump before? I know that Antti next, but I'm jumping just to reply to Mark. In my view, it's very Kantian. And if we used again notion of citizen and subject from Foucault point of view, not from Biesta, both Biesta and Kant, they don't trust subject. They only trust citizens. So you need first through the education, become citizen, and then you can be equal. Before you're not equal, and you cannot be rational. From Kant, you can be rational. From point of view of Biesta, you don't have a good desire. You're not adult. And this is, when you become adult, democracy will be okay. But before that, authoritarianism, which is both Kant and Biesta saying. Okay, Eugene, shut up. Antti, please.
I think this, what Mark raised, the idea of uniqueness is really interesting. It reminded me that I'm actually just recently read a couple of papers from Biesta together with his former doctoral student about Charles Taylor's ideas, and I've been reading Charles Taylor as well. And I think Biesta, at least to some extent, seems to agree with Charles Taylor in ways that are significant to our discussion. Well, what Charles Taylor says is that we have, when people are pointing out that the modernity has brought us egoism, that people are just interested in their own ways of being and in defining their own morality and just, consumerism, all sorts of bad things that characterize nowadays society. Charles Taylor was making the point that actually it's a misinterpretation of liberalism that was involved in Rousseau and other thinkers of this kind of romantic liberalism, and Charles Taylor is saying the same thing as Biesta, that what's problematic is not the individualism as such, but rather that the individualism just becomes self-serving, and we have lost connection with others and compassion to others and the relationality. And I think this book is echoing very much the same themes, that if we a little bit step back from how the Biesta seems to say that we should teach students to rather seeing it as an argument, how should we understand the education? How should we talk about education and students? Should we talk about them as individuals in the wrong way, according to Charles Taylor, that they are individuals just defining themselves, defining their own morality without any kind of shared standard for morality, of shared ideas of even the idea of sharing or relationality. And in the paper that I read from Biesta, he's making the argument against adult education, that we just have to think about people as autodidacts, that what we lack in that is the discussion of axiology. Eugene has been talking about that as well, about values, that it's not only about acquiring knowledge about acquiring things that we need, but becoming a kind of a person, becoming a person that desires things that are like worthwhile. That at the very least, we should think that common discussions about values and morality are important, and somehow, although it's a bit kind of outdated already, but I find the Charles Taylor's arguments really kind of resonating and calling my attention. I'm not sure to make a conclusion yet if I agree or not, but I think this is very close to what Biesta wants to say. We have to push for individualism, but individual as a relational entity, as somebody who has values, who cares for others, and who takes care of others and the world.
Of course, I disagree with that, but that's another story. Okay. Do you want to say something or not? I'm just make sure that, Melissa, you have at least possibility to say no. Okay, Charles, in this case, Charles, I think you wanted to, right? And
I just wanted to ask you, Eugene, a question. So your definition of education, which sounded quite axiomatic to me, that was the Socratic one about the value of the examined life and of, you know, thinking critically and alternative perspectives. Isn't this something that Biesta is doing? Biesta is defining education, even though he maybe not developed it the right way or so on, but just agreeing with what Antti was saying, he's defining education in terms of the value of the other and recognizing the way in which the other confers meaning on us. And I was very interested that he didn't refer to Buber. Does he refer to Buber? He probably does. Maybe I read the book too quickly, because doesn't Buber kind of talk about that? How the other, we hear the voice of the other. And I mean, this isn't just Biesta. This is all now through kind of new kind, you know, you can get this in some self-help literature. Well, self-help has kind of died out a bit in the sense it's not so effective, but isn't this idea that we can hear other people and other people can tell us things about ourselves that we don't know? And isn't Biesta, to put him in a really good light, saying actually children and adults are all equal. They can all be the same insofar as they can all recognize the value of the other and respond to the other and be in relation. His call to adulthood could be a kind of reverse move towards equality. Actually, he's saying children can be the same as adults in this respect. They certainly can't be the same as adults in terms of Eugene's idea of critical thinking, because children can't take place in that discourse in which they examine life, because they're still so buried in the things they have been told and accept implicitly without thinking about them. So maybe, if equality is important, Biesta is offering us a more possible scene for being equal with children than you are, Eugene.
I disagree with many statements that you make. Okay, but Anna is next. Anna is next.
Yeah.
I'm losing my thread. Okay, so I think that what's missing here is that on one hand, he is talking about waking up the student to acknowledge the other, but he is talking about it when he works as a teacher with the students. He does not acknowledge the students' interests and the students' understanding of the world, because that's besides the point. And he does, since he has already a formed idea, what does it mean to be an adult? He himself kind of like does not, as an educator, behave as an adult, because he's not seriously interested in the idea of the other who may be the student. First of all, he moves away from this comprehension in favor of the desire, but then even as an educator, he does not critically examine with his students what the desire is. I think education is not about whether you're selfish or not selfish. It's an occasion to give students and yourself a serious dialogue about the desires and examination of their desires. But at the end, it's upon that would be Bakhtinian, to come to their own internally persuasive discourse, what for them is good or bad, or horrible or not horrible, whether they will want or not want to agree with the teacher or not. I will just tell you one example from the time when I was a student in the It was like a 12th grade, and our homeroom teacher, who was a philosopher and taught philosophy, psychology, and sociology, and we had a lot of respect for him before he became our homeroom teacher. He made that mistake, which I think Biesta would not recognize as a mistake. There was some earthquake that destroyed one Yugoslavian town. So it was like all over the newspapers. And he brought to us one day when he had a class, homeroom class, an article about two people who from England themselves collected materials, came to visit and they came to help the people in that town. And he unfortunately didn't recognize that at the moment when he wanted to impose that on us, we were not ready as students. We were in some state of big giggling and really wanted to show him that he doesn't have a right to impose on us, that we should be all like self-sacrificing people who give up their own lives for the sake of helping other people, whether we agree that with him or not. At that moment, we wanted to push back. And he made a mistake, our homeroom teacher, of starting to punish us if we don't agree with that idea. And it became a problem for him for the rest of the school year and for us, because he finally had to expel one of us just because she was too rude to never agree with him, and never actually kind of like really gave us an interest in why and how and what was our potentially, some transient state in which we were when he wanted to impose that on us. It was just like a total break of education and we lost total respect for him. He could not teach us anything anymore, and we were 18-year-olds and rebels, and he did not know what to do, because he absolutely was so sure that what he wanted us, where he wanted us to get with our desires and with our values, that there was no question about that. And we were just telling him, like, shut up, that's it. So being on that other receiving end, when the teacher does not recognize your ideas, not recognize in a sense that they have to say, yes, you're right or something, but seriously examine with you why you think so, what was the background of that, is there something that they didn't take into account or not, and gives you a right to author your own opinions. That's when the teacher respects the students' rights. That probably teaches more than any kind of imposition about what does it mean to be dialogically a person with equal rights of consciousness. That's Bakhtinian. And for him, that's not true.
Tina?
So, I have you noticed his definition, his view on individuals, the students' freedom? Because he writes explicitly that he's against their freedom. He says that it's a Western thing, freedom of choice, he said, is a wrong idea. So I just want to ask you what you think about this notion of freedom.
Antti, please.
I think that Biesta seems to have a quite similar idea of freedom and similar criticism of freedom as Vygotsky has, and like the Vygotskyan scholar Jan Derry, as well as building on Spinoza's ideas. That I think, according to Jan Derry's interpretation, Vygotsky is saying that freedom is not just free-floating. It's not kind of and if we read, for example, Margaret Archer, I think she argues against the libertarian and classical ideas, classical liberal ideas of freedom, as we are just like disconnected and just have the freedom of choice. That's a wrong idea, in a similar way that Biesta is arguing. that actually our freedom and our determination of the structure and the structure determination on us is a dialectic, that we achieve our freedom by subjugating ourselves to others, or in principle like cultural instruments. For example, that we gain freedom by learning to use some cultural tools. That with those tools, or by joining a social practice, we can achieve much more than we can without that. I'm not sure if Biesta is in agreement with this idea, but I think Biesta's idea seems a little bit similar. That we need others to become free, to become agents, that we are not totally separated from the structure. And this is, of course, similar to Giddens and other, an Archer and other. Of course, there are variations of this idea, but we are not like what Archer would call downward conflationists, that we reduce everything to individual, but rather we start from the center.
No, not please.
Can I for a second? I want to say at the very end in his epilogue, he talks about the idea of what we might call neo-liberal freedom, that is the idea of freedom as pure choice, or in less philosophical language, the freedom of shopping, the freedom just to pursue your desires. I have tried to make a case for grown-up freedom. Grown-up freedom is not the sovereign freedom Hannah Arendt has rightly criticized, but freedom is action, that Arendt, or difficult freedom from Levinas, we encounter when we try to exist and with the world is not just with ourselves. And that is a fascinating statement to discuss with people who are growing up or not growing up, or students or not students. It's definitely an issue for dialogue with people who are in education. But I also disagree with Hannah Arendt that, or with Biesta, that you can equalize education with work or with as action. Education is stopping the action, getting out of the action in order to critically examine what this action is. So in a way, education is not activity system. It cannot be evaluated in the same way, because it's another way of existence in where you have to have a freedom to try out any kind of idea that and examine it. So even try out an idea that killing is good or whatever, like outrageous things. If you don't have a right to examine that, I mean right in the sense of freedom, not the freedom of choice, but the freedom to examine every kind of action, every kind of practice, every kind of existence. Where anything of that is closed, that's where education loses. And that's why, for me, education is not the same as action. It's not the same as production. Education is unproductive. And I don't think that he makes that, when he talks about freedom of choice and freedom, of course, in our life with other people, we are not unlimited, but to examine where these limitations lie is a matter of education. That's what he does not understand, that where the boundaries are, what happens if you move them this way or that way, where you don't have a so-called freedom to do as you will, but you, as in education, should have a right to know why you will something, what's the where that leads, and what are the issues that are in every unique situation at that point at stake. And so I don't think that he understands the freedom in the same and education in the same way that I do.
Charles, do you want to say something? Because I see your nonverbal.
Yes, I do. I just wanted to provoke Anna. Anna, so you use the idea of education as different from work and a different kind of action, where we can.
No, it's not action at all. It's not different action. It's non-action.
Well, okay, but I was going to disagree with that in a minute. But what I was going to say was that it's a sort of unconstrained space where we could discuss any issue and reflect on any of the questions of existence or society in a way appropriate to the obviously to the age of the students and so on. But I think this idea is far too utopian, because in fact, and also not right, because if we think about what Antti was saying about Charles Taylor, I mean, schools are part of society. And for example, recently we had a speech competition at school. I don't like the speech competition, but I have to be part of the speech competition. And we have different ages of children doing speeches, and a discussion came up. Should the children be allowed to make a speech about any topic that they like? And then we said, okay, the 12 and 13-year-olds, yes, they should be. They're old enough. We think it's okay. And so then, because, they're part of this world, they have all these serious topics like, gender, for example, and one gender, and do you have a right to mutilate yourself, and suicide and different ways of killing yourself, and so on and so on. Now, when it came, we had a discussion amongst the teachers. The children did these speeches, but they wanted to give these speeches to the younger students as well. And we had to make a decision whether or not this was something we wanted the younger students to discuss, not necessarily based on our values, but the values of our community, because we're a community school. The community runs our school, and also on the value of the parents of those children. So there's that particular problem, and I know that you think about that as well. But my more serious objection to what you say is that I'd like to take Susan Langer's idea of a school as being a place for symbolic action. So I believe there's a different kind of action, but it's still action where children in a kind of virtual space, in the old sense of virtual, create all kinds of imaginary worlds. This is also a form of action, and it's an authentic kind of action. I don't understand this idea of authenticity coming, say, from John Dewey. It's a certain limitation, a pragmatism, an idea of what is real. For children, imaginary actions are actions. Therefore, the virtue of play and drama and making things and creating things, this is a form of action. And to me, this is prior to the kind of critical and reflective education you're talking about. Also important as what you're talking about. I'm not saying one or the other, I'm just saying both.
Mm-hmm. Can I answer to that?
Sure.
I agree with you about a certain aspect, but I think the school as an institution has many functions, of which education is one function, and that it sometimes is at odds with some of other functions, especially when you say you have to protect younger students from the older students about what topics is appropriate or not, and those are other considerations which are all very important, but not educational considerations. They are for safety, for what's considered in a certain group of people ethical and moral, and that does not mean that that's not important. But every time when these considerations overcome the educational considerations, education stops, because it becomes a black hole. Like if you don't talk about sexual things at certain ages, at that ages, children will not be educated about. Maybe later they will, and that's all fine. So for me, it's just to find where the limitations or where the boundaries of what we are doing are there. Critical dialogue is in very many ways opposite from creative authorship, because constructing real worlds in imagination and construction is a different kind of authorship than deconstruction. And to me, education has to have deconstructive component. If it doesn't have, it serves many other things. It serves authorships, it serves socialization, it serves collaboration, and a lot of values. But without critical thinking, it's not education. Maybe narrow view was strictly education.
Yeah, can I jump in completely? I'm addressing something different. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we constantly interrupt our thoughts, so it's okay, I guess. I just want to address Antti and Charles to some degree, maybe Tina, I don't know, about that. And let me tell you what why I'm constantly saying I disagree with that. And a very strong disagreement. It's very ontological for me, disagreement with you guys. Because you're coming from the Western society and with capitalism, with the issue of the capitalism as alienation, particular alienation, because it's not alienation, it's not only coming from capitalism, which is Marx was wrong about that, but with this idea of creating autonomous individuals, which is true. Capitalism trying to do is as consumers, trying to put people in that position. The problem is the kind of emerging solution, what I hear from Antti strongly and Biesta as well, is to create a center as a unity of the things, which will be opposite to this idea of individualized, autonomous individuals. And to do it through the others. And interestingly, very clearly, not from Antti, but from Biesta, that become authority figure. I just want to tell you the 20th century experience already done that. It's called socialism, from which I came. Guys, stop repeating this idea. This is 19th century resolution of capitalism. It's already done. It's terrible. It's creates totalitarianism, not by mistake. It's not because it's deviation from Marx or somebody else. It is the essence of totality, of creating centers. And that's why for me, Bakhtin is so exciting, because he creates, it's also terrible, but it's not realized yet, position of dialogue, which moved away from that debates of whole, which is autonomous individuals. It's not about that. And it's not about relationship. It's dialogue, which is neither, it's a different things than relationship. It's being in dialogue. And this dialogue doesn't need to have common values. By the way, can you see that commonality of values leads to totality very quickly? Because if you start eliminating all alternative values, that become, and totalitarianism is about that. It's about goodness, how to make all people good. Okay? And we've done that. It's called 20th century. Please, let's start rethink 20th century rather than forget about what has happened. And in my view, this is what Bakhtin is so interesting for me, because he creates alternative to these both traps. By the way, the trap of socialism is much worse. Why? Because it creates genocides. It's constantly creates genocides by its nature. Capitalism is bad, whatever, you can say that, but at least it doesn't create on the inherently genocides. It can create genocides, but not inherent. And totalitarianism creates inherent genocide because it's intolerant to anything that is other than authority in current moment are. It's become elimination of otherness. And that's idea of the center, of unity, of agreement, of common values. This is where it's moving in that
illegitimacy of non-participation.
Yes, legitimacy
to be different, really.
Yeah, yes, and legitimacy of choice. Because this idea of anti-capitalist idea, okay, let's eliminate consumer choices. It's a terrible idea. Because this is, in a way, what Bakhtin wrote about capitalism. Capitalism, he wrote, creates almost like materialistic conditions for dialogue. Why? Because it creates market where completely strangers, not because they're connected to any tribal or family relationship, meet together. Yes, it's a mechanical meeting. It is very alienating meeting, true, but at least it's meeting, and people not coming, they may want to take advantage and exploit each other, but they're not killing each other, what in tribal world or familiar world might happen. And we need to appreciate this kind of things. And I know it's difficult because you're sick and tired of your capitalism, living in capitalist society. I understand that. But you stop totalizing this kind. Capitalism also brings a lot of important things. And we already tried that other things. We tried this unity. We tried that center. It's nothing comes good. And trying again, in my view, it's not because they didn't try well. They exactly tried well. What's come out is this Maoism, Stalinism, Leninism. It is trying wealthy, and Hitlerism, because it's just the same idea based on some different things. It is totalitarian. It's all of them socialism. National socialism, international socialism. It's the same damn socialism that was tried. Why don't we can start thinking about something else for a change? And start thinking about why it didn't work in 20th century. Again, it's not because it's aberration. It is expression of this desire. We need to, in this case, Biesta may be right about that, engage in critical investigation of our desires. And that can be good. Yeah, okay, Melissa, now it's promote. Good.
Well, on page 18, that's where Biesta is talking a little bit about this, and that's what's been on my mind as to whether or not he is trying to impose something on students. He writes, as long as the educator decides for the child or student which of their desires are desirable, the child and student remain objects of the educator's intentions and activities. The key educational challenge, therefore, is not simply to tell the child or student which of their desires are desirable, but for this question to become a living question in the life of the child or student. This requires anything but direct moral education, but rather hints at the need for opening up literal and metaphorical spaces where the child or student can establish a relationship with their desires, just as it requires the creation of a gap between the desires as they arise and the actions that follow from them. So it seems to me like he's saying education is helping students become aware of their desires so that they can reflect on their desires, maybe shape or direct their desires in a way that they view as best. So I wonder if people could respond to that idea of what does he say from Spivak, the uncoercive rearrangement of desires?
This reminds me of Rousseau. I wish I could believe Biesta, but I couldn't believe him. And for me, what I like about Rousseau, that he was very cynical and he was very clear about what he said. He said that a good teacher, progressive teacher, he didn't call progressive because that term didn't exist, but in his enlightenment teacher, is the one who creates condition under which students wants what the teacher wants, but thinks that the student wants it, that desire comes from, so there is no coercion, there is manipulation. And that's the ideal situation for, and I just don't believe Biesta, because in many ways he talks about what's desirable for Biesta and how for example, he talks about transformation of desire. What if there is no transformation? Is it good? From Biesta's point of view, no. But what, from your point of view, I like how you think, Melissa, but I think Biesta is masking not only for us readers, but from himself as well. But on another place, he will immediately jump and tell us what he wants. And that's why I wish it was true, but I just doubt. Michio, please, and then Anna. Oh. Go ahead.
Is it okay now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Eugene, where did you get the idea that Biesta is sort of pretending or?
When he talks about adult, when you need to be adult, and adult he defined through the desire. You need to decentralize yourself. You need to be dialectical between assimilation and accommodation, using Piagetian terms, or using terms destruction of the world and destruction of the self. This is what he talks about that, and this is a final desire for the student, to become a good student. And this is for me contradiction to what Melissa read about. And about even when you read about when he talks about transformation, what if nobody transformed? Let me, and I know that Antti, you were going that. Let me provide a very interesting, because once my students in one of my classes had a terrific discussion. By the way, I don't remember how we went to that. And my students were future teachers. And some student raised that issue, whether or not teachers of the Hitler are responsible for Hitler to be Hitler, to did such crimes. Are these as teachers responsible? And we had back and forward. And one of the students who was extremely religious students, this is Mark actually, sometimes religious students can be super helpful. She kind of Christian fundamentalist. She said replying to some other student that you guys want to be God. You want to be everybody to make good. By the way, she was replying students who saying that teachers are responsible for Hitler to be Hitler. because he became a Hitler. It means there is something wrong in his education. And she said, listen, even God doesn't want to make people good. They want people to discover it themselves, in this case they become good, but he doesn't want to make them good. And your teachers are so arrogant and so proud, she called it proudness, that you want your students to be good. She said that that teachers of the Hitler only responsible if he become evil because of ignorance, because he didn't know something. But if he knew some things and still become evil, teachers do not have any responsibility for his evilness, because this is his decision. This is what he kind of revealed himself to the world. Not because he didn't know something, but he knew and still choose evilness. This was very interesting, very helpful for me, at least, very interesting debate in our class. I've learned a lot myself from that debate, because I said, wow, that's interesting, because in part of that, we want to be, when educators talk, want to be God. We want to make people good as educators. This is actually enlightenment project, to make people good. And we think that if something bad happened in the world, like people, for example, reject global warming, it's because they're ignorant. We couldn't see other possibilities, that they may be not ignorant, but they ignore it. And they can be evil, can be this, can be that. But there are other issues besides issue of education and ignorance there. And this is what I want to say, but Antti, you're next.
Yes, I think it's a really complex and very interesting idea circulating. In response to Melis, I think that there is something in that passage that you read that invites me to question a little bit the interpretation that this group is having on Biesta. I don't think that he is so unilateral that we think about. But my other point was that I think it is really interesting to not to be confined within just educational ideas, but think about what kind of a society are we building with our ideas. Eugene, you mentioned the capitalism and socialism. I don't think it's so black and white. Well, I'm living in a Nordic country like Tina, which is a combination of capitalism and socialism, which, well, I think it's different than when you lived, Eugene, in your youth. When we talk about moral education, I'm interested in moral education as well, and morality, caring for others, blah, blah, blah. I think it is an educational issue, and it's very difficult in the postmodern times. I would like to pose a question. Would you be a very extreme liberal in this sense, that everyone just construes their own values, that it's up to individuals to construe, or do we have some middle position? I think the other answer is not just extreme socialism, that there is just one center who defines the values for everyone. But even for Charles Taylor, I think he was discussing multiculturalism, and that we have different ways of understanding that, but that are not originating just for one person, but we live in families, blah, blah, blah. So we are already connected to communities where we get the moral ideas from, and then we can dialogue. And I have some difficulty with liberalism, in the sense that each of us should just be accountable to ourselves about our morality. But I'm not a moralist in a sense.
This is, of course, not my position either. So.
Yeah. I'm asking, what is your position? Not only Eugene's, but everyone else
Mark,
in the group.
Okay. Mark, and Mark.
I start. Thanks. That's an interesting question. I've been working a lot on kind of rehashing some work on my dissertation, where I studied the notion of bullying in an innovative school, and the challenges that emerged as a result of well-intentioned efforts on the part of educators who are really following the kind of the expected. If you read the literature on bullying, I mean, this is really what's recommended. This is a moral problem. We have bullying. We have people, creating conflicts through, the use of, cyberbullying and other things like this. And so the idea being that, you know, what we need to do is teach students or kids the right way of thinking, expose them to, you know, these ideas, and through a Kantian kind of idea where what you do is you have the kids dialogue and come up with the ideas themselves. So, for example, what these teachers did was they asked the kids to reflect on what is bullying and what are the types of bullying and so on and so forth. Getting them to sort of think about bullying as a concept, having it mill in their minds, you know, I guess this is the idea, and then come up with their own understandings. I mean, you know, it's not completely, you know, the idea being that bullying is an idea which supposedly has a value beyond what kids, I guess, would normally think of in their own lived experience. And that kids may not necessarily be talking about this. They may be bullying themselves. And so this is opening up the ideas and sort of getting them to think about it. I critique this because I said that I noticed that when I was looking at what the kids were actually talking about, they actually came up with really interesting concepts within dialogue that address the issues that were really going on in the events that were really happening in the lives of these kids. Whereas bullying as a concept failed to take any persuasion. It had no persuasive influence outside of the actual classroom setting. And far from that, it even, in a way, was not authoritative. So the kids just kind of would laugh if somebody brought up bullying outside of the classroom context. And it's kind of like, what are you talking about bullying for? That's what we talk about. That's what the teachers want us to talk about. That's not what actually, you know, that's not really a moral, ethical issue in our lives. And they don't talk like this, obviously they're kids, but that's not really a moral, ethical issue in our lives. That's something the teachers want us to do, you know. And so from a moral, ethical point of view in education, I would see that really what we need to do is give kids the opportunity to dialogue about events going on in their lives that are of real significance. And so I'll give you an example. In the work I was doing, I noticed that there was this one kid who was causing a lot of conflicts on the football field. And he, you know, the teachers wanted to talk about bullying because the other kids were making fun of him all the time. But actually, if you listen to this one kid's comment during a class meeting, which the teachers held, and in the class meeting, they gave the kids the opportunity to talk about this, which is wonderful because that's actually recommended in the bullying literature in order to get kids to talk about bullying, interestingly. But this kid said very, very poignantly, he said, you know, that's because you get angry at other kids. And other kids then respond to you, and it runs out of control. Your anger is the problem. He broke down and cried because he knew deep down that's probably what it was in the class meeting. So it's very emotional. It's very insightful. It's the otherness that Biesta is talking about. It's the other that is, but it's a Bakhtinian sense of the other as being like something that you are in a way sort of responding to. And everyone is responsible for this problem. The teachers are responsible for this anger problem because they reacted in certain ways. The other kids are responsible. But what I noticed was there's a tendency in education and moral education to sort of want to go, I don't want to talk about anything specific because then I have to get into the messiness of that. And I don't know where it's going to go. And I don't know, you know, because it's a touchy problem. You know, what if the parents complain? What if this, that, and the other? There's too many risks involved. So I'm rather just talk about something abstract moral universals, which don't really fit into the lives of the kids, but they're important. So what the hell? This is a great chance to talk about bullying. Let's do it. That's kind of what I noticed was happening. And I feel that maybe a lot of moral education is very well intentioned, but fits into the trap of this Kantian idea that we can understand morality and ethics through abstract universals, which don't necessarily, which are intended to apply to someone's life, not now. It doesn't matter what impact it has now. What matters is what impact it will have on their future. So we're asking the kids, wait a minute, let's suspend reality right now and talk about ethics and morality. As if there are not ethical and moral issues going on right now in the lives of the kids that are impacting and significant to them right now in their lives. And so this is what I kind of recommended as far as a dialogic approach to moral ethics and universals. And that's where I would be really, that's why I kind of reacted against Biesta's idea of, he seems to really apply that Kantian ideas more.
Yeah, and in my response, this is one response against kind of this moral discourse, Kantian discourse. But there is other discourse that Antti is talking about, community. Community can be oppressive as hell, and family can be oppressive as hell, and we know that. So the question, this is why I like Bakhtin was talking about. By the way, one of the terrible things that in my view happened that in Western world, and I don't know it's about Japan or some other places, they don't have notion outside of individual or society or social. And in Slavic culture, there is notions that completely outside of that continuum. Like, for example, личность. I don't know how to translate that. It's translated sometimes personality or person, but it's, or personhood, but it's not the same, doesn't have the same life. But anyway, Bakhtin was talking about no alibi in being. And being means community, first of all. It's about family. It's about tribalism. It's about these things that you found yourself and it's uncritically accept that. It's something that Biesta likes to as adapting concept. And this is alibi, because this is what you found in, and it's guided by you, and you always can refer, oh, we do that because this is our communal value, because we have agreement, because this is how in Finland we do things. And in my view, that what Bakhtin is, it's about against that, and this is what Mark talks about, it's taking responsibility in critical dialogue. When you take responsibility, what does it mean take responsibility? When people exactly start challenging you, is that this is not good, what you've done, or what you're doing, or you propose, it's not good. And you need to, responsibility means you have to reply. You cannot just, You have to reply. You have to reply to yourself because you have challenges that you feel discomfort that sometimes calls conscious, but or other. You should not suppress that. You have to reply. And on that reply, people continue challenging you and yourself you keep challenging. And this is what the process, that's the only process that is actually in Bakhtin, and my understanding of Bakhtin, that is most, the one that actually the third way.
And can I add to that, it's a different understanding of what's an individual or a person outside of that curriculum, because you have to take responsibility for you, not for everybody else. Yeah. So in that sense, when people challenge you, you become you, because at that moment, it's because of the others, yes. Here we hear Vygotsky, we hear Bakhtin, but in a different way. It's what he mentioned in the beginning, also from Levinas, that you're unique in the sense that nobody can answer for you. Nobody can take a responsibility for you. You have to take this responsibility for what you think, what you mean, in the face of others. It's not just, and in your own face. Like, what are you going to think about yourself?
Yeah, and that's a very different idea. Yes, and each person has to do that. And it's personhood, again, I don't know how to translate this Slavic term in English, because English...
It's personality, although it doesn't have that connotation.
Exist that.
But lichnos comes from, and personality both come from the Greek and the Latin word for mask. Lice or lizo or likeness means something that you become, or a character in a play. That would
No, and I disagree with you.
No. But
it's mask coming from that. It's not reverse thing. No, okay. But Okay,
but it doesn't matter. Okay, but it's on the outside, and that it's what others see.
What others see you, yeah.
What others see you. Yeah, Charles and then Antti.
Can I talk about socialism in New Zealand? Because, you know, that's interesting. And also a couple of other things. I want to just reply to what you said, Mark. I think that quote from Levinas that comes up in the book, it's that sense of your responsibility is that sense that you have, here is something that you must do that nobody else can do or think in your place. It's your responsibility. Surely that's the idea that Biesta is also leading towards, however much he doesn't actually realize that he still has that very strong view of answerability. I mean, in no way defined or articulated as Bakhtin makes it, but that's still, that's why, that's the purpose behind his book, that idea of a different idea of selfhood rather than the ego-driven consumer of the neoliberal world. So the second thing, Mark, I thought what you were saying was really interesting about moral education, because one of my roles at my school is to, along with my colleague, is if disputes between children become too difficult for the classroom teachers, we always want the teachers and the children to have discussions like you were describing, social problem discussions, where the children lead the discussion about what it's about. And we really try to let the children and not impose our teacher views, because we know if we impose our wisdom or our values, they, apart from anything else, whether it's right or wrong, those usually aren't so useful to the children, you know. Sometimes they want us to be authoritarian just because we need to protect them for reasons of safety. But if we really want the children to learn about those values, you must have a proper discussion. And I think this is a real problem. This is an example of the real problem with Biesta, is that he wants that to come, that authority to come from the teacher. But the teacher is the person who more often than not enables the children to see each other's otherness. And that's where Biesta, it seems to me, to not take that nearly far enough. Maybe he doesn't want to do that. But something else here, in that discussion you were talking about, Mark, the children, you have all these discussions going on. So, you know, the children have had a discussion with the teacher. Friends have had a discussion with each other. They've had a discussion with their parents, maybe with their minister at Scouts. Then they come into your office because it's turned into fighting. We had a situation where we actually had weapons. And for the first time at our nice middle-class school, there was blood drawn and fights with proper weapons. And then it came all the way, you know, in the end, you have, as an authority figure in the school, you have to try and mediate. Actually, we're using a slightly Finnish model called kiva from Finland, although we have borrowed it. We haven't trained in it. We don't like being trained in models. We never have a model. We were invited to become proper kiva. We said, well, just read it and then do it. Anyway, so we have a bit of kiva. You know this, Antti?
Yeah. I think there are good things into that, but I think there are also problems. It's not.
Of course. And anyway, all I want to, is that you're aware that all these different discourses are taking place, including what Eugene was saying. The children are very aware of this. They're aware that if in the end they're agreeable and they take part and they come around to thinking what you're thinking, this is a super Rousseauian thing that Eugene, I think, rightly criticizes, but sometimes wrongly identifies. Like Eugene and I, just to tell everyone here, quite frankly, Eugene thinks that some things that I do are super Rousseauian, and in this, he is wrong. Because he hasn't been there and he doesn't know. The children coming to think things similarly to me isn't because I have made them think like that at all. But I think one of the interesting things we mustn't do with Biesta is kind of conflate that Rousseauianism of the teacher manipulating the children, like, you know, coming around to think what they think, or in a much more social constructivist thing of, dialogue being a means to an end of children arriving at a certain kind of knowledge or view that the teacher wants them to arrive at, you know.
Or desire.
Yeah, anything like that. And this is where Bakhtin is far superior to any of those people. But I think what I wanted to say was there are many occasions where that thing that you read, Michio, Melissa, you read it, sorry, that passage that you read where you see children, where they're in this kind of theater for exchanging and thinking about their views, and they come to kind of perspectivize and think and examine their own view critically, not because the teacher wants them to, they want to. They want to. The teacher enables this to happen. The teacher sets up an environment or a space where this can happen, and the children then as in a kind of theatre, as an improvisation. They examine each other's views and they go away and think about it, and they come to a new view, a view of their own. So I think this is something that can happen, and maybe Biesta, if we're thinking constructively about him, is trying to think forward into that kind of situation where we create a space where our authority is important in setting up that space, but where the children then will discuss and come to their own perspectives. And just a quick contrast, I was in charge of a school on a commune where no one's view was allowed to have any precedence. Everyone had to make their own decisions. The children were allowed to sit on the desk if they wanted to. They were allowed to do their work or not if they wanted to. I was only allowed to write a report for them if they wanted me to. Their parents decided where we had a meeting. Sometimes I had to go to the parents' house. They didn't want to come to school. Everything was about what everybody thought. And I'm going to tell you right now, it was a schmozzle. We have a New Zealand word. It was like you kind of let a whole lot of dogs out and they're just running in every single direction, barking wildly with joy. You know, certainly was kind of quite interesting. It was a fantastic experiment, but without the teacher authority to set up that scene and to say some things in the beginning, it was often quite unproductive. Everyone was arguing, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist, you know, and so on and so on. And finally, socialism in New Zealand. We have a society where we are quite socialist in a way. We have a socialist prime minister, and our deputy prime minister especially has criticized the market and neoliberalism and the profit motive. And we have a society in which our society is founded on at least two views that are irreconcilable. So we have a bicultural society based on the indigenous people, the Maori, and they have views that are irreconcilable in some ways with Western ideas. One in particular is that they have a value, probably a spiritual approach to life, something called whakapapa. You are only have meaning conferred on you in relationship to your ancestors and your connection to the land. Anyone who is European, like me, of European origin or any other origin other than Aotearoa, cannot have this value in their lives. So immediately we have a society which is a society we all try to get along with, is quite socialist in a way, but it does not have a center because it is split. It has a schism right in the middle already. So this is a kind of socialism of a kind that you have not yet encountered, Eugene. This is a decentered socialism. And in fact, it's more than that, because then we have all the other ethnicities and cultures contribute.
Are you sure, Charles, that I didn't experience that?
I think you did.
It sounds very familiar to me, what you just said.
The schism. There is no...
No, not the schism, but this idea of the land and stuff like that. That's what I lived through.
There's
no private land, for example.
No, but there is no. But this is a particular idea that predates that socialist idea of all property being in common. What I'm saying is,
of course. By the way, read Marx. He always talks about that that traditional societies already had that society of the socialism and communism.
Sure,
I'm return back to some degree, returning back to that. So it's not that unknown.
I'm saying that in our socialist society, we have a model where we accept there are views that there is dissensus, and there are views that are also other to each other, but we need to include all these views in decision making, even though we aren't going to agree.
Yeah,
so different from
by the way, this is for me liberalism is about. Okay, I think, is it Antti next, and then Melissa? Antti, is it you?
Okay, yes. Thank you so much for your contributions. I think it's really interesting, like what Mark said about this very concrete situation in the school, and also Charles' analysis of it and sharing of other examples. Yeah, it's sometimes quite hard to relate these big societal questions about liberalism to very concrete situations in schools. And you mentioned the Kiva Koulu as well, like the anti-bullying program. I think what's problem with Kiva Koulu is that I think it's quite good. It has reduced bullying, but what it doesn't pay attention to is cultural aspects of bullying. For example, that a major reason for a male student to become bullied in Finland is that he doesn't fit to the gender categories for males. Mm-hmm. So this is not addressed in Kiva Koulu bullying program. And when we start to think about this, then we introduce the culture into that. I mean that then it's not about abstract reasoning of Kant, and then we recognize that Kant is just one sociocultural way of understanding morality, and so is Bakhtin. So you mentioned, Charles, you mentioned the Maoris. Recently, I've been also exposed to kind of post-colonial theories. They are quite popular in Finland in the universities. So I must admit that I'm really confused. I'm really confused because also practically I'm doing research in a kindergarten, which we specifically chose because it's very multicultural. Yeah. Or actually, it's very hard to find white children in that kindergarten, even though it's in Finland. And we are going to do change laboratories to promote compassion. And we understand compassion in as a cultural concept, that it's different. It has different forms for different cultural groups or communities or practices. So when we try to promote it, do we have a right as like Western researchers to impose our own, let's say, Bakhtinian view? Or Eugene and Anna, you were talking about morality, Bakhtinian idea of morality as an individual responsibility.
No, it's not. It's not. This is what difficult to explain to you guys. It's not, because it's not individual responsibility. It's личностная responsibility, ответственность. It's not. It's so difficult to get through this barrier because in English at least, there is no terminology for that.
It's a responsibility, but a responsibility does not only have the where it comes from or from whom it comes from, but it has addressivity. So it's a responsibility that addresses the others. So I'm standing behind that because I address you or a group of people. So if you, let's say, are going to introduce compassion, then taking a responsibility for compassion has to address, first of all, why, what's good about it, what's not good about it, even with the smallest children, when it's better not to have compassion, and for whom, who is, there is a whole universe of addressivity that's a very, it's not just one way, it goes in many ways.
And the fact that is somebody is called Maori, it's not gives alibi in them to be right or pursue something to be right. Just because they're Maori and came before or suffering or this or that. It's not, this is what Bakhtin was pointed. There's no alibi in being. It means there is no privileged positions. Either Maori or whatever, post-colonial, post-whatever you can call that. People who suffered 100 years or oppressed or whatever, nobody has privileged position. Nobody has alibi in their being, in the fact that they have some particular history or particular culture. And this is very important things. So in this case, Bakhtin doesn't have morality in that sense, because it's very pluralistic from the point one.
But I have in my notes, I have some individual instances, for example, in which a kind of a Muslim teacher tells a child that you have to behave because a good Muslim behaves in this way. Mm-hmm. So there are in our data, there are different ways of understanding morality. So what I'm confused of is that what also post-colonialist theories do not provide, because they are very deconstructing. I don't think they are, or never propose what should be done, but they only criticize. What would be a framework that would be somehow
there is no such thing as
between these different and help us to reconcile these different views? Maybe it could be Bakhtin, but Bakhtin
no. It's not Bakhtin was against idea of framework, something that's separate from people, that's what Mark talked about, from circumstances and from people. And this is what Bakhtin is against. Any framework, which he called theoretism. He called it any attempts to find a framework.
in school, which is a community that's forced, like you have to be there and you don't have a way to move away. The whole idea of not reconciling or leaving conflicts so that we can, because they just cannot be reconciled, is very strange. But that's what makes the school be the very, very violent institution as school. But it's the reality is that certain conflicts cannot be reconciled.
A
Yeah,
school.
that's why I focused on the. Oh, sorry, Charles.
Oh, no, I know that Melissa wants to talk.
Oh.
Yes, well, I was just thinking, based on Mark's comments about bullying, that having a discussion or a dialogue in class is one thing, but what action can be taken afterwards, and who has the power to take those actions? Who gets to make the decisions after this dialogue and what is done? Or is it just, we'll just talk about it and then maybe something will change? At my school recently, we had a situation with a student who was bullying, and we had a mixed age judicial committee where the students all talked about what rule was broken and what consequence there should be. And this particular judicial committee, a couple of the students were really good friends with the student that was doing the bullying. And I could tell as the staff member on the committee that they were being very lenient on him because it was their friend. And I pointed out to the whole group, this seems to be a little lenient. This kind of behavior should not be tolerated ever at our school. And that whole conversation kind of changed based on my sort of, critical perspective. And then as a result, they decided to recommend that the student be suspended. So they had really authentic power to do something about the bullying, and based on the conversation that we all had together. So that's my question, is like, where does action fit in, decision making? Where does power fit into this idea?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting question. I would answer, I guess one thing would be what's the focus there? I mean, for example, if we ask the question, what do we do about the problem of bullying? Already that's a loaded question. It's already sort of presuming that bullying is the way in which is a concept, or what I would call a node of responsibility that's already lying and existing and meaningful within the framework of the students' lives and experiences within the classroom. The challenge I find sometimes with some anti-bullying programs is that they're looking for bullying. They're looking for this, and they're saying, where's bullying? Let's find it. We know it's out there. Where is it going to be? And this is a clear case of bullying, and so on and so forth. And the challenge that I found with some of the with the school that I studied was that they were so keen on interpreting the situation that they saw as bullying, but they didn't look down underneath the surface to find that actually, in this particular case, that the issue was really this kid's anger that other kids were responding to. The kids were telling them that in the dialogue, but the teachers were so singularly minded, focused on bullying and addressing the problem. In fact, one teacher even told me, well, I just got back from a conference on bullying, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to address the problem. And I thought, well, that's wonderful, but the problem is the kid's experience connected to that? And I'm wondering, and Melissa, in this conversation that you're, and I wasn't there obviously, but in the situation you're describing, what is the way in which the kids describe the problem out within their experience? For example, I remember one kid was talking to me, and I didn't know the circumstance in which he was describing, but the other kids clearly did. And I was having an interview with them. It was a different class. There were two classes, 5, 6, and 7, 8 grade. And the 7th, 8th kids were talking about bullying, and it just came up because it's such a big deal for the teachers, and the kids always roll their eyes every time they hear the word bullying. They go, oh, not that again. And I said, well, why? Tell me. And the kids say, well, there's not really bullying going on here. And one kid said, well, yes, there is. And then he proceeded to tell me what the bullying was. But then it quickly became evident that he was completely inarticulate and couldn't describe how bullying related to his life or the lives of anybody in the school, to the point that, so it was very interesting, the inarticulateness that he had in describing his own experience through the lens of the universal of bullying. So bullying has an interesting, is a concept is really interesting to me. And I don't know about compassion. I have to think about that. But as a concept, it's very interesting because it implies a certain relationship between the individual and the society, and between the individual and the others, that in a way there's an implied sort of like social engineering aspect to it. It's brought in from outside through the Kiva program, through other types of programs. It's brought into the educational arena from outside in a way, exactly the way Biesta talks about what we should do. But it doesn't seem to live within the experience. That was the thing. That's why I focused in my paper on the dialogic event as the in a sense the unit of analysis rather than the bullying. Because the dialogic event was actually where everything was taking place. Giving kids the opportunity, as Charles was doing in his school, so he talked about giving kids the opportunity to like discuss and dialogue about their lived experience, creates opportunities for certain types of nodes of responsibility to emerge. And in the school, there were interesting nodes. Anger was one. Girl drama was another one, which I have some data on that I would really like to go back and look at, because it really brought in a lot of enlivened debates, as Eugene was talking about the responsibility, and about specifically how is my action and my thoughts and my feelings and my thinking and so on and so forth responsible for the other people's issues. And I particularly, from my point of view, as someone who kind of wants to side with the bullied, I look at it and I also say to myself, but the issue here is it's the responsibility of the quote unquote victim as well. There are certain things that a kid might do that are annoying to others. Maybe it's best that they know that, and that's revealed in dialogue. Yes, it's going to be painful. Yes, it's going to cause people to be quiet and to silence and to be angry, upset, worried, frustrated. But that is the substance of interpersonal dynamics. They are uncomfortable and they are messy. But sometimes I feel like bullying is a way to kind of just sanitize the risk and sort of bring in a dynamic that unfortunately doesn't really live within the lived experience of kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense. I'll just quickly respond that I think that asking how the students describe the problem is really key, because really I was the one who introduced the word bullying. Now that you mention it, I realize in the conversation. But I think it was an appropriate use in that particular situation. There were other things going on. There was a game that had been an ongoing game for a few days where they were kind of rough with each other. But what happened was a big kid pushed a little kid down. And when he came to the judicial committee, he admitted that he did it on purpose. And we also looked at his record of past incidents that had to do with behaviors. And so all of that, though, I think because it was an actual problem that occurred, as you were saying as well, it made the conversation really authentic, But I think what gave it even more authenticity is that the students had the power to actually do something concrete about it. In this case, recommend a suspension to the school meeting, so that they had some authority in the situation. And so I think that makes the dialogue so much richer because they actually can do something about it rather than just talk about talk about the incident itself. But anyway, I completely agree that a lot of other things emerge when you have dialogue instead of this very reductionist idea of bullying.
I think we are more than doing that 3.5 hours. So I just want to say it doesn't mean that we have to finish. And Charles is going to talk. One small comment about Mark, you said about compassion, and I just want to remind you that in Israel, Adam Levstein doing a very interesting research of that ritualistic discourse on compassion that Israeli teachers do. Not on bullying, but compassion. In this case, the kind of perpetrator should confess that not only what they've done, but they have compassion, that they have sympathy to the victim, and they have to force on the students to do that. And the students learn to do that in very rationalistic way. Of course, the students are not stupid. They know what the teachers want for them, and to know how to say that they're truly sorry, because it's the way to get out of the punishment. But it's also closed any discussion like what really happened. This is not about that. It's about who has pain and another party have compassion, and that's fine. Problem solved. Charles, you're next.
Anna, I thought you said something which is to me quite controversial, which is you regard a school as a violent institution, that the school is inherently violent because the students didn't choose to be there. And that's putting a huge emphasis on the value of freedom and choice. I mean, children don't have choice in most aspects of their lives, not just schooling. So that would, by that reasoning, you could then also argue that most of life, children are subject to violence of one kind or other. But I think that actually, I would suggest that we should view that on a continuum, and that schools are definitely coercive, but that coercion goes all the way from non-violent to violent coercion. And I just wanted to briefly say, I think one of the biggest problems with Biesta is that his authority seems to be centered on the person of the teacher, whereas actually the real problem with authority and coercion is the magisterial discourse that exists in the school. And as Roncier says, is the representative, it's not just schools, it's the whole of society is pedagogicized. And everyone is on this path towards lifelong learning to certain admirable goals about being a good person and so on. And that children from the time, they're very little, they don't have much choice in going along this pathway. And whatever we think, I know I'm just characterizing the most general terms, but I just wanted to say something very briefly about one example. In schools, as soon as a parent uses the word bullying, usually they go straight to the principal or to me, because they think that the teacher and the children can't handle it anymore. But basically what they're trying to do is prioritize or have an argument with the school over their child and what is or isn't happening. And often bullying is kind of like the straw man in an argument that they're having. And immediately they go to the person who guarantees and legitimizes the school's discourse, and that's the principal. And we say in almost every single case, the principal didn't like this, but all the teachers ganged up on him in a way and said, actually, if it turns into an issue of bullying that you have to solve, you will be the least likely person to solve it. We have to take it back to the children and their discussion if we are to have any chance of sorting it out. And of course, the principal, he keeps on going to the default setting. A parent rings him up and says, this is terrible. And then we say, well, actually, let's have a discussion. You need to go to the teacher first of all and you need to have a dialogue with the teacher. Why are you coming to me? Because it represents this discourse that I think Biesta does not really acknowledge enough, which is the institutional discourse. It doesn't matter how good you are or are not as a teacher, you are also lacking agency, and you are also constrained as a teacher by a coercive discourse that you are part of instrumental education and pedagogicized society, including moral education. But just a very quick story. I once was at a school with some very tough area. It was a fishing village. And I was the only representative of authority. There was no policeman, no clergyman, nothing at all. we only had an amateur fire brigade that didn't have a phone. There was nothing there at all. It was a wild kind of place. Strindberg wrote a novel about a place like this, a very good novel actually, in which this idealistic scientific person with all modern ideals and knowledge went there to try and reform everybody and bring them out of their benighted ignorance, and he failed miserably and caused a huge amount of trouble, incidentally. But anyway, this boy came to my school, and he said to me as he came to the school, "I've just been expelled from another school. My teacher was violent towards me. If you do anything, if you even touch me, your fate will be the same. We will go to the police and you will lose your job as well." So I assured him just quietly that I had no intention of doing anything violent towards him. That's why I want to be very careful about the use of the word violent. And like a lot of the children at the school, he came to the school as a safe place, as a place where he could do things, where he had things that were far less coercive than other parts of his life. Okay, it was coercion, but coercive maybe in a good way. Is there such a thing? I think so. And it was very interesting because then this boy, he kind of improved somewhat and he got into discussions with other boys instead of fighting with them. He was a difficult customer. He was a tough customer, and his parents hadn't been employed and their parents hadn't been employed, and all those issues that we all get in schools. And teachers know a lot about these children. You know, they come to school. But it was really funny because one day his father came to school and he said to me in an interview, he said, "Chris is doing well." He said, "You're teaching him to read and spelling." It was coercive. I was teaching him things to do. This is my job to teach him. That was coercive. I agree with that. But he said, you know, he's a little shit, actually, my kid. He said, "If you really want to make progress with him, every now and then you'll have to beat him. And I give you my permission to beat him." This is what the father said to me. So I think as teachers, we're all the time confronted by these very difficult moral dilemmas where if we are in a less coercive position than maybe the children's parents or other organs of society are, and so on. And I should also say that in this place, I was the only representative of society, and from a lot of these families, I had no respect whatsoever as a teacher and no authority at the beginning. After a while, I gradually did. Anyway, there you go.
I think next is I'm lost, unfortunately. Antti, I know, but somebody else. No? Okay, Antti. Oh, Anna wanted to say something before, no? Anna,
yeah. I just want to answer.
I thought before, Antti.
Yeah, sorry, Antti.
And then Antti.
I think that you are in some way right and in some way not right, Charles, because I think, yes, the coercion does not have to be violent in the sense of harmful, but it's very hard for me to separate because it depends. You can have a good reason for coercion, you can say, and you don't have to beat somebody, but psychological coercion or social coercion is never without the use of force of some kind. And in that sense, I use the word violent when I say that there is some forcefulness from which somebody is suffering. Maybe we cannot live without it anyway in any society. That's one thing that I wanted to say. Another one I wanted to say also, we are constantly trying to battle against pedagogization of the whole society, or can education solve all the problems? Or there are so many fine lines between what is doing what and what are we doing, and that's why in school, that's why I said the school has multiple functions, because there is life going on too, and some of those functions are not educational functions. It doesn't mean that it's either or, but at some moment you're doing education, and at some other moment you're doing healing, or some other moment you're doing policing, or protecting. So there is a lot of things that the decisions that we make at every moment may not be always educational decisions, and we have to be aware of that. It's not that they are bad or something, but it's just something else going on, and that's what I'm going to say.
Okay, Antti.
Yes, I really liked Mark's thought about that whether we impose bullying or compassion there, and which is not kind of stemming from the concerns of the participants over there. this is actually something that we've been discussing and thinking when we apply change laboratory, because from the point of view of Uri Engerström, every change has to be stemming from the participants' concern, and it has to be a response to kind of internal contradictions within the activity system. I'm not sure if I'm buying all the stuff, but I think that's a contradiction. Whether we can in education to bring something, and I think this resonates with Biesta's, isn't it? Biesta's idea of interruption. Let's say we are going there to the kindergarten with an idea that we want to promote a culture of compassion. For example, in one of its aspects, it could be like widening the circle of compassion, whereas we have evolutionary, we have a tendency to experience compassion towards people who are similar to ourselves or in the in-group. And then through education, we can widen the circle of compassion. But do we have a legitimation to go there and try to do this? I'm also, it was quite interesting when Eugene, you were talking about Adam's research on this ritualistic idea of sympathy or compassion. I'm just working on a paper in which I try to kind of criticize this standardized, packaged idea of sympathy or compassion, which seems to be the mainstream, that we have pre and post test and we can increase all sorts of procedures. I don't buy that. Our approach is something else. And I'm reflecting back on Biesta's work, and in our approach, at least myself, we all the time try to problematize our own idea of what is good in terms of compassion and negotiate with the families and with the teachers and with ourselves in those workshops later on how they understand the company, whether it's relevant for their lives, and try to qualitatively like problematize and revise the understanding of what would be a worthwhile way of conducting compassion in that work, and how we even understand the very notion. So I think that might be missing in Biesta's work, of going back to the educator's own ideas of what's good eventually. But this is giving very, very good food for thought. And coming back also to Eugene's idea of the Hitler, I think one rationale of saying that we need to widen the circle of compassion in the society, also Charles Taylor is critiquing the most liberal ideas of the society, that we have become separated from, we don't care of each other, and we have all these extreme versions of it, like fascism or like extreme racism, or that's the opposite of compassion. So we could try to do a cultural intervention that would be instrumental.
Or by the way, the fascists will disagree with you that it's opposite to compassion. They say fascism is a super compassion. It's just about their own people.
The circle of compassion is very. Yes.
But they will disagree with you because they're primary about compassion. It's America first. You know, America first.
Exactly. That would be our provocation, our Biesta's interruption of what's going on there. But it is very cultural. I'm also referring to what Charles said about the corporal punishment, because in our data we have the kindergarten staff. There are a lot of Somali families there in the kindergarten, and apparently, according to the teachers, they are beating their children. So how should we react to that?
It's illegal. It's illegal.
As Westerners.
Again, from the kind of my idea of education, it should be critically investigate when the beating is good, when it's not good, good for whom, for what, and so on and so forth. That's become an interesting question, rather than how to eliminate beating. The same thing about bullying. Is sometimes bullying good? For whom, when, under what circumstances, when it's bullying, what it's not bullying, and so on and so forth, rather than just how to eliminate bullying. Like, it's constantly about eliminating something. And by the way, the idea is, this is what socialistic idea. If we only eliminate something and somebody, there will be paradise on the earth. Only elimination. This is elimination idea. Let's eliminate evil, and everything will be good. Well, could be this idea of elimination is evil in itself. This purification of the life could be, this idea is bad. And again, but this kind of questions kind of brings with idea of examination of life rather than how to make goodness in the earth. It's a very different ontological project, referring to Mark. It's a very different. One thing that I want to tell you about freedom, I was actually reading a very interesting book, very influential on me. I disagree on many things, but it's also dealing with uniqueness. It's an anthropologist and anarchist, very famous anarchist, modern anarchist. His name is David Graeber. He is one of the founder of, this Occupy movement and many other things. And he investigates the notion of freedom. He actually, again, I don't know much about that, so I'm just presenting his ideas. So I don't know if he's right or wrong. He's actually an anthropologist. Maybe he knows more about that. He said that this word coming from, it's a Germanic word, and comes from idea of friend. Freedom and friend, it's the same root words. And he said he investigated this actually historical, traditional societies, and then Roman law, who becomes, what does it mean to become a slave? And here, because the Romans did mess with this idea, because slavery is opposite to the freedom. And so the way how Graeber put that, what emerging out of this is the freedom is right of the human to initiate, maintain, and break relationship with other people within the context. And what's the people become slaves because they don't have that right anymore. They will stuck with the people, and also their relationship with the people with whom they want to have relationship is broken. They don't have right to break or maintain or initiate a relationship with other people. And that's very interesting definition of freedom. I never heard about that. It's very, as you see, it's very relational definition. It's not about I want to do, it's not about desire, although it is part of desire, but about right on the changes or not changes in the relationships with other people. Anyway, I just want to throw that because we talk about freedom, and I thought it's very interesting, a very recent reading. I don't know what you guys think, and whether or not it's true that in Proto-Germanic word, the freedom and friendship is the same root. They have the same root. I don't know about that. You're probably coming from maybe Tina, since you're kind of Germanic, your language is Germanic. I don't know if you sense that or not. No, you don't. Okay, so again, I don't know. That's that Graeber's claims very kind of elegantly, but I don't know if it's true.
I also wanted, before we part, because I think I'm very hungry by now, but I wanted to tell Charles and everybody else about the two approaches to drama in education that I recently organized in some conference in Greece. And one of my colleagues that works in prisons, not in education, but in education in prisons, she's a drama pedagogue in prisons. She is also using drama instrumentally for doing something else. But she says that prisons, preschools, schools, and hospitals are all coercive institutions, prison-like institutions, and that her drama is meant to free people from that coerciveness, at least psychologically, to feel like they can be free people.
And this is like Foucault also claimed. By the way, if you apply this Graeber's idea of freedom, that's exactly why. Because in schools, students usually do not have freedom, right to initiate, maintain, and break relationships. And that's, in this case, it was. By the way, in families as well, I recommend watching a very good movie, Japanese movie, Shoplifters, exactly about that, how families can imprison people, and that's a very interesting movie, well done. Besides, it has very good artistic value besides this interesting.
Beautiful.
Shoplifters. Cool.
Anna, I cannot help but intervene on this subject of coercion, because I actually do object to the idea of schools being called coercive institutions. They are only partly that. And the reason is that in schools we have heteroglossia and heterodiscoursia. You can hear it. If you can hear it, if you can hear those voices, you know that it is not entirely coercive. It is not totalitarian in that way, because you can hear not just all kind of dissenting opinions, but all kinds of things being said, which are beside the purpose of the institution, which are outside of the discourse of the institution. They can occur within the walls because the walls are not high walls. In fact, they're no walls. So I think that view of we don't need no education, you know, that sort of Pink Floyd song, that's a kind of popular, view of schools, when in fact there's a whole lot of variety of schools, even within state systems. So I would really like to put that forward as an optimistic thing, that schools and kindergartens, the things that all I have acquaintance with, they vary, and whereas they are kind of distressingly standard and uniform from the outside, there's a lot of variation within when you start to hear what the children are saying. I have a very optimistic view of the amount of power children have, even though I'm constantly taken back when I see children, how much they're also coerced.
Okay, let's us, before we disintegrate, think about how we're going to, first of all, if we like the experience that we have right now, what kind of book we can, and how we will choose the book. Thank you, Antti. I also will say that. Look, it's just by, we have objective measurement of how much we like it, because there are, 8 of us, and we manage painfully stay almost for 4 hours together. So there is something, some qualities there, and nobody, well, at any time people could leave and just switched off or to say goodbye, I'm sorry, I need to run. So how we're going to choose next, and also any suggestion if we need to change something, whether or not we're establishing a new format, new culture, using Antti's kind of notion, a new kind of understandings. Do we like that or not? Should we change something? Should we just put a list of the books or articles? By the way, we don't need to read books. And just to discuss what we want to read next, and should we vote on them? How are we going to do that? Like, what's your suggestion? How we should organize? Should we just put a list of the suggestions for the next?
Yeah.
Or can we discuss now, decide now? I don't know. Maybe we become interested in Mark's article about bullying, or Adam article about like ritualistic compassion, or something else, or should we just put suggestions and then?
I think we should put suggestions on the Facebook, create a place where we can suggest in the commentaries suggestions, and then kind of like see which one gets the most votes.
Okay. Is it other ideas? Okay. Okay. Well, the last thing. I actually forgot to tell you, I was evil. Remember, I'm benevolent dictator, but sometimes I can be, benevolent dictator can be easily become evil dictator. I forgot to tell you that I'm actually recording this our meeting. And I would actually discuss whether or not we should record, not record, whatever. But I actually set up the system. I actually noticing right now that it's recording. It's not I press that, because I decided I will talk and then we will start, but meanwhile, it's automatically start recording. And if we like this idea, should I raise that? Should I send to the world? What should I do to that? People.
So I have a suggestion about this.
Society.
This is our Dialogic Pedagogy Journal Facebook group, and we have on YouTube a Dialogic Pedagogy Journal channel where we put all those podcasts that we did for almost 9 months or something like that. And I suggest that you put it there, and we can then give a link to all of us. And then if people don't have anything against that, we can put the link on the rest of the Dialogic Pedagogy group. That's a closed group. Nobody outside of that group can find it. So unless you have something against that. And I know Antti was very, very careful that in Europe this privacy is a priority, and we had to get all I would say that
because of early.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I was saying that early is very careful about that.
The European right, but you were very good about this law, let's say. So anyway, I personally don't have anything against other people listening to this if they are interested to spend almost 4 hours listening to us discussing. But I think we had so many interesting ideas that I would probably revisit this at some point of time, just to take some ideas for quoting you people when I write about something.
Okay, let me tell you, suggest that if one person objects that, we should not do that.
That's right, yes.
Because we should just respect one person
exactly.
Without necessarily even why concerns are. Do we have anybody who is objecting that to put it on the DPJ Facebook whatever group? By the way, feel free to email me before. Let me do it tomorrow. If you start thinking about any objections, please email me, and I will not do it today. Okay. By the way, if you have objection even to keeping it for us, let me know as well, and I will, like, if for some reason I don't know, you might have some concerns. Mm-hmm. I think that's it. Well, thanks a lot for participation. It's terrific. And is it timing more or less work? Because we are in other interesting things that we in very different time zones. How it's like right now, it's almost 4 o'clock in Philadelphia. Mark, what time it is right now for you?
The same.
The same? Melissa, what about for you?
It's 3 o'clock in Chicago.
In Chicago, the same? And Antti, what time it is for you?
Quickly. Hello.
It's now 11 o'clock. This is very convenient time for me to start. That we have. Yeah.
Okay. And Tina, what about you? Is it the same?
No, it's 10 o'clock.
Oh, wow. There is a difference between Finland and Sweden.
Yeah.
More than one.
And, 9 o'clock, Charles. 9 o'clock in the morning, Charles, or 10 o'clock?
In New Zealand.
In New Zealand. It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. We're ahead of you. The future is happening here already. Yeah.
And what's the time?
The time is 10 o'clock, and it was the only thing about this one was I had to get out of bed quite early, but c'est la vie. It's okay. It's a good time.
I could start a bit later if it could be 1 or 2 hours later if it's more convenient for Charles.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? Let me ask next time people. So it sounds like 2 p.m. in our time will be a little bit better. Because, okay, but let me ask you, and I will set this time or 2 hours later and see how it will work for all the people. Okay. Good. Okay. Happy New Year and Kwanzaa and whatever.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
So if you want any concern, email me, please.
Okay.
Any concern, if you have email me about the recording. Otherwise, adios.